Welcome back to Goofy Harry. This time, we're bringing you what if Harry caught Narcissa's darkest secret, and she begged him to stay silent. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. A light in the wrong window. The Christmas decorations in Professor Slughorn's drawing room were suffocating. Baubles the size of grapefruit hung from every available surface, catching and multiplying the firelight until the entire room seemed to be breathing in warm gold. Garland twisted around every doorframe and along the mantelpiece, studded with enchanted ornaments that chimed softly in harmony with one another in bell-like tones that had begun to grate on Harry's nerves. Someone had convinced the tinsel to move on its own, which meant it kept slithering across Harry's shoulders like something alive and unwelcome. He was considering removing it for the 5th time in as many minutes when he heard the voices in the corridor. "You're making this impossible," Snape was saying. The potion's master's voice was flat and dangerous, the tone that made even the bravest Gryffindors think twice about showing up to class unprepared. It was a tone that suggested quiet violence held barely in check, violence that would come swiftly and with precision if he deemed it necessary. "Every night your nerves are worse. Every night you come to me with the same pathetic excuses. How much longer can you possibly expect me to tolerate this?" There was a long silence, the kind of silence that seemed to stretch and deepen, filling the corridor with the weight of unsaid things. Harry found himself holding his breath without conscious intention, his entire body locked into stillness. "I'm doing my best," Draco replied, and Harry's hand froze halfway to a cup of mulled wine. There was something in Draco's voice that Harry had never heard before, something that sounded almost like desperation or fear. The usual Slytherin arrogance was stripped away, leaving only something raw and bleeding underneath. There was a pleading quality to it, and that was perhaps more terrible than any sneer could have been. Harry could hear it in the way the words came out slightly too quickly, tumbling over each other like he couldn't afford to slow down for breath. Like slowing down would give Snape time to interrupt him, to cut him down, to reinforce whatever terrible certainty was hanging over this conversation. "Your best is failing," Snape said coldly. "The Dark Lord does not accept failure. You know what happens to those who disappoint him. His patience is not infinite, Draco. None of us can afford your incompetence." Harry's stomach twisted. The Dark Lord. There was only one person that could be. Only one name that Snape would never speak aloud in a room full of witnesses. Voldemort. And Snape was talking about him as if he were alive, as if he were a present threat, as if his displeasure was something to be feared in the immediate and pressing sense. The casual certainty in Snape's voice, the assumption that Draco understood exactly what that displeasure would entail, made Harry's skin crawl. Harry's mind raced through possibilities, each one worse than the last. He'd thought Voldemort was weak, scattered, nearly powerless without a body. But what if he was wrong? What if there was something Harry didn't know? What if everything he thought he understood about the current state of the war was built on faulty information, on assumptions that had been wrong from the very beginning? He set down his wine glass with deliberate care, trying to make himself smaller, more invisible. The warmth of the room suddenly felt suffocating, pressing against his skin like a physical weight. Around him, the party continued unabated. Slughorn was regaling a group of sixth formers with a story about a golden goblet and a very important prize, his voice loud and self-satisfied and utterly oblivious to the danger in the corridor just beyond the room. No one else seemed to have heard the conversation. No one else was paying attention to the two figures standing just beyond the doorway, their shadows falling across the threshold like a prophecy of something terrible to come. Harry could see those shadows from where he sat, the play of lamplight transforming them into something ominous and stretched. He found himself unable to look away. The footsteps retreated, moving away from the party and deeper into the townhouse. Harry counted them without thinking. Snape's heavy, measured tread and Draco's lighter, quicker steps. They faded entirely, disappearing toward the private rooms where Slughorn kept his collection of rare pensive memories and his most expensive wines. Harry sat very still for several long moments, his mind working through the implications. Ron and Hermione had already left earlier in the evening, something about Hermione needing to finish an essay for Slughorn, and Ron being unwilling to stay without her. Harry had remained behind partly out of duty. Dumbledore had asked him to attend, making it nearly impossible to refuse, and partly because he'd been hoping to overhear something useful, something that might explain the tension that had been following the school like a shadow all autumn. He'd been bored, if he was honest, bored and restless, and looking for a distraction from the weight of knowing nothing, of being on the outside of secrets that everyone seemed privy to except him. He'd overheard something, all right, just not what he'd expected. Draco was being set a task, not a punishment for failing at something, but an actual task. A task important enough that it required Snape's constant badgering, Draco's mounting panic, and the implicit threat of the Dark Lord's displeasure. Harry thought about the vanishing cabinet he'd discovered in the room of requirement last spring. He thought about the way Draco had been watching it, obsessing over it with an intensity that suggested life-and-death stakes. He thought about the way the boy had aged 10 years over the course of a single term, the circles under his eyes growing darker, his face growing sharper and more skeletal with each passing week. For the first time in a long time, Harry found himself feeling something that might have been sympathy for Draco Malfoy, which was unusual, which was unsettling, which suggested that whatever task Snape was referring to was bad enough to turn even Harry's instinctive adversary into something pitiable. Something dangerous was coming, something that Snape was somehow involved in, something that terrified Draco Malfoy. And somehow, without knowing how or why, Harry was certain that this danger had Dumbledore's knowledge, if not his explicit approval. The thought made Harry's chest tighten with something that felt dangerously close to anger. 20 minutes later, after extracting himself from Slughorn's clutches with the promise to return for more conversation before the night was out, Harry had made his way back to the castle under the pretense of needing a book from the library. Instead, he'd made straight for Gryffindor Tower, divesting himself of the dress robes that Molly Weasley had insisted he wear to the party. The emerald green of the decorations, she'd said, brought out his eyes. Harry couldn't have cared less about his eyes. He cared about the invisibility cloak, which was where it always was, folded carefully at the bottom of his trunk beneath a stack of old photographs and Quidditch clippings he'd saved from the Daily Prophet. The Marauder's map emerged from the same trunk, wrapped in a piece of old parchment. Harry murmured the activation charm and waited for the ink to bloom across the surface. It was like watching the castle wake up, all its secrets spreading themselves before him in careful detail. The feel of having this knowledge, this power to see what others couldn't see, it was the one thing that made him feel truly in control of anything. Peeves rattled around on the second floor, probably looking for someone to torment with a bucket of water or a well-placed hex. Mrs. Norris prowled the dungeons with her usual purposeless dedication, her dot moving back and forth in patterns that Harry had learned to recognize over the course of years. Snape was in his office, where, it had begun to seem, he spent every single night during the holidays, the sad bastard, locked away with his thoughts and his secrets and whatever darkness lived inside him. Harry had stopped wondering years ago whether Snape's obsessive solitude was choice or compulsion. Either way, it painted a portrait of a man utterly alone, which should have made Harry feel something like pity, except for the fact that Snape seemed to have earned his isolation through sheer force of personality. Harry's eye caught on a name moving along the high street in Hogsmeade. Narcissa Malfoy. His hands went very still. That was impossible. There were protective enchantments in place, certainly, wards that should register any visitor to Hogsmeade, any disturbance in the carefully maintained boundaries around the village. Such wards had been there for generations, designed to keep the village safe from unwanted intrusions and to keep an eye on what happened within its borders. The fact that Narcissa Malfoy appeared on the map at all suggested either that the wards had been compromised, or that someone powerful enough had neutralized them. The thought made his stomach churn. And more than that, there was no logical reason for Draco's mother to be in Hogsmeade at all. Not on a snowy December night, when the roads were treacherous and the weather was worsening by the hour. The Malfoys had a townhouse in Diagon Alley, all white marble and silver fixtures, staffed with house elves and kept in pristine condition. Hogsmeade was a dump by comparison, a village for servants and lower-order wizards, not for a woman who wore robes that cost more than Harry's annual food budget. The Malfoys didn't slum it. They certainly didn't do so in secret. And yet there was the name, moving steadily down the high street, moving with purpose and intention. Harry watched the dot move carefully, deliberately, toward the back streets, not toward the 3 broomsticks, where the owner might see and recognize her. Not toward Honeydukes or the post office, toward nothing at all, as far as he could tell, toward empty spaces and shuttered buildings and places that no one would think to look, which meant either a hidden meeting or a hidden purpose or both. Harry's pulse had picked up without his noticing. This was it. This was the kind of discovery that might actually explain something. His decision made itself before he could reason his way out of it, before his common sense could catch up and point out all the ways this was a terrible idea. Harry knew he should wait, should think this through, should tell Dumbledore or Ron and Hermione or anyone with actual authority, but he was tired of waiting. Tired of being kept on the outside of things, of being treated like a child who couldn't be trusted with information. Harry folded the Marauder's map and tucked it into his pocket. He pulled on the invisibility cloak, settling it around his shoulders with the familiarity of long practice. The silver material fell properly into place, and he could see through the weave of it without being seen. The weight of it settled over him like a familiar second skin, like an extension of himself. It was a weight that had meant freedom once. It meant something else now. It meant crossing a line. He was going to follow her. The 7th floor was absolutely frozen, the kind of cold that came from stone and winter and no human warmth. The castle itself seemed to be sleeping, the halls empty and silent except for the distant sound of the party still going on 3 floors below. Harry's breath misted in the air as he moved, invisible beneath the cloak, toward the one-eyed witch passage. The castle had settled into that peculiar silence that winter nights brought, a silence that seemed to come from deep underground, from the bones of the building itself. It was the sound of the earth sleeping. His footsteps made no noise against the cold stone as he made his way down the spiral stairs and through the dimly lit corridors. There was something transgressive about moving through the empty castle this way, something that made his pulse quicken and his skin prickle with adrenaline. He was breaking rules. More than that, he was breaking trust. The one-eyed witch passage was narrow enough that Harry had to crouch as he made his way through, the cloak dragging against the ancient stone walls. It smelled of dust and old magic, the kind of magic that had been woven into the castle's foundations centuries ago, magic that had outlasted empires and wars and the rise and fall of great houses. He tried not to think about how many people had used this passage over the years, how many secrets it had kept. Some of those people were probably dead. Some of them were probably Death Eaters. When he emerged in the basement of Honeydukes, the relative warmth was almost shocking. He pulled off the cloak for a moment just to feel the difference in temperature, just to let his frozen fingers come back to life. The warmth of the shop, even in its basement storage area, was almost unbearable after the castle's cold. He stood there for a moment, breathing in the smell of butter beer and chocolate, trying to settle his racing heart. The warmth felt like a reprieve from something, like a moment to turn back before it was too late, but he didn't turn back. He pulled off his gloves and flexed his fingers, feeling the pins and needles of circulation returning, and then he wrapped the cloak back around himself and made his way carefully up the stairs to the shop above. Point of no return. The street outside was a different world entirely. Hogsmeade was sleeping, most of the shop windows were dark, the streets empty of the usual bustle of evening patrons. The 3 broomsticks still had lights on, but even that building seemed muted, its usual warmth diminished by the late hour. Only a few patrons remained inside, visible through the windows, their silhouettes moving slowly. But it was the snow that caught Harry's breath and held it. It had been falling steadily for 3 days now. Not the wet, slushy snow of early winter that made everything dirty within an hour, but the deep, clean white of true winter. The kind of snow that fell in December and stayed for weeks, covering every sin and every dirty thing with a blanket of perfect white. It lay thick on the rooftops and clung to every corner and crevice, transforming the little village into something from a child's illustration. Every edge was softened. Every rough corner was rounded away. The cobblestones, usually gray and worn, were now clean and perfect. It made Hogsmeade look almost innocent, almost like a place where nothing bad could ever happen. It also made him visible. The snow showed every footprint, every passage, every disturbance in its perfect surface. Harry kept to the darker streets, moving quickly but carefully, watching for the flash of movement that would indicate he wasn't alone. His heart was beating too fast, his hands beginning to shake slightly inside the pockets of his robes. This was lunacy. This was the kind of thing that got you expelled. This was exactly the kind of rule-breaking that Dumbledore had never explicitly forbidden, but had somehow made it clear he disapproved of through tone and manner and the weight of his disappointed gaze. And yet there was something almost exhilarating about it, too, something that made Harry feel alive in a way he hadn't in months. The danger felt real. The choice felt like his own. Harry was doing it anyway. Some part of him had stopped caring about the rules somewhere around the time Dumbledore had started keeping secrets from him. He found her on the high street, and he almost walked past her without recognizing her. The Narcissa Malfoy of Harry's memory moved like she owned the world, or at least her small corner of it. She moved with the absolute certainty of someone who had never questioned her right to exist, to take up space, to be noticed and catered to. This Narcissa moved like she was trying not to be noticed, like being seen would be the end of everything, like she was carrying something precious and fragile that might shatter if anyone looked too closely. She wore a dark cloak, plain wool, nothing like the silver-embroidered robes he'd seen her wear at the ministry. No jewelry that he could see, no rings, no earrings, nothing that would catch the light and give her away. No sign of the wealth and status that usually clung to her like a second skin. Her hair was pulled back under a hood. She looked, Harry thought with a jolt of surprise, almost like a servant, almost like she was trying to be forgettable. The transformation was startling. Narcissa Malfoy had always been impossible to ignore, her beauty and bearing commanding attention. This version of her seemed to be actively trying to become invisible, which somehow made Harry notice her more. She walked with her head down, eyes on the snow-covered pavement, placing each step with deliberate care. When she walked past the lighted shop windows, she positioned herself in the shadows, angling her body to avoid the light spilling onto the street. She was hiding, Harry realized. She was moving through Hogsmeade like she was smuggling something, or fleeing from something, or both. The thought was cold and clear and certain, and there was something almost heartbreaking about it. The certainty of her movements suggested long practice, careful habit, the kind of behavior that had become second nature. When she turned onto the side streets, the ones that led away from the brightly lit shops and toward the seedier edges of the village, Harry felt his pulse pick up further. This was the area near the Hog's Head, where the locals went who wanted to avoid tourists and ministry officials and anyone who might report them. The area where things happened that Dumbledore probably didn't ask too many questions about. Rough area, dangerous area if you weren't careful, area where people went to make deals and commit crimes and disappear forever. This was where people came when they had something to hide, which meant Harry was getting closer to something real. Narcissa walked through it like she'd walked these streets 100 times before, like the danger held no threat to her, because she already carried her own danger inside herself. She turned up a narrow lane that Harry would have sworn didn't exist the last time he'd visited Hogsmeade. The buildings on either side were old and decrepit, their windows boarded or dark. Some of them looked abandoned for decades, slowly crumbling back into the earth. There was a feeling of abandonment here, of things left behind and forgotten. This was the part of the village that tourists never saw, that wizarding children were warned away from. This was where things went to die. The walls of the buildings were stained with damp. The cobblestones were broken. A feral cat watched Harry pass from a window, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. The silence was profound, the kind of silence that came from a place where no one ever went, where nothing lived except ghosts and regrets and the shadows of forgotten tragedies. Harry's lungs felt tight. He was too far into this now. If something went wrong, if someone discovered him here, there was no good explanation. No way out. She stopped at a 3-story townhouse whose facade had probably been elegant once, maybe a century or more ago. Now it was all peeling paint and crumbling brick, windows that had been dark for so long that the glass inside was opaque with dust and neglect. The stoop was broken in places. The door frame was beginning to rot at the corners. Dark stains marked the walls where moisture had seeped in over years of disuse. And yet, there was something else. Something about the way the door was positioned, the way the hinges looked, suggested it wasn't completely disused. Someone had been keeping this place up. Someone had been paying attention. It looked like the kind of place that had been abandoned for years. It looked like the kind of place where no one would think to look for anything. It looked like a place where bodies could be hidden. Narcissa drew a key from her cloak pocket, an actual muggle key, not a wand, not magic. A simple metal key, the kind that a servant might carry, the kind that suggested ordinary human access. Harry watched as she used it, her hands shaking slightly as she inserted it into the lock and turned. The door opened with the kind of silence that suggested excellent maintenance of the hinges, the kind of care that spoke of recent, regular use. This wasn't an abandoned house. Someone had been here. Someone was taking care of it. Someone was devoted to it. Harry made a decision that he knew was reckless. He knew it was stupid. He knew it was exactly the kind of thing that would result in expulsion if he was caught. And he did it anyway, because he had to know. Because not knowing was worse than any punishment, worse than expulsion, worse than almost anything he could imagine. He slipped forward, grabbing the edge of the door before it could close, and slipped through into the darkness beyond. His hand shook as he gripped the wood. There was no turning back now. The interior of the townhouse was frigid. Harry's breath misted in the air almost immediately, forming small clouds that hung in front of his face like ghosts. He could see that every piece of furniture had been covered with sheets, giving the room a ghostly quality, like he'd stepped into a tomb. The dust was thick enough that he could see footprints in it, multiple sets of footprints in a regular pattern, suggesting someone walked this path frequently. Regular patterns suggested routine, and routine suggested this wasn't something temporary. Someone had been coming here for weeks, maybe months. The footprints were recent, the edges still sharp in the dust. Whatever this was, it was ongoing. And yet there was a single candle floating ahead of Narcissa, illuminating her path with a small, steady glow. A candle that moved with purpose, that knew exactly where it was going. Harry pulled the cloak more tightly around himself and followed, staying far enough back that he could duck behind one of the sheet-covered pieces of furniture if she turned around. The sheets were heavy and dusty, and his fingers came away gray when he touched them. This place hadn't been occupied in a very long time, which meant the candle, the intentional path, the careful steps, all of it was something new. She moved through the house with the certainty of someone who had walked this path 100 times before. Down a corridor, Harry noted the covered portraits on the walls as they passed, their frames dark and empty, whatever they had once contained removed or forgotten. The walls themselves were decorated in the ornate style of the previous century, all fancy wallpaper and trim work, now faded and peeling. She moved past them like they weren't there, like she was a ghost passing through a memory of a place. Harry wondered what portraits had once hung there, what history had been erased from these walls. Her footsteps made no sound. The candle bobbed ahead of her like a wayward star, leading her deeper into the darkness. After what felt like an eternity but was probably no more than 30 seconds, she disappeared behind a heavy tapestry. Harry's throat was dry. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might shake the cloak right off his shoulders. He was breathing too fast. He forced himself to slow down, to breathe quietly, to get control of his own body. Harry approached it cautiously, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. His heart was hammering against his ribs. What was he doing? What could possibly be at the end of this that was worth the risk? What if this was nothing? What if he was about to get himself caught following a woman with a perfectly innocent secret, and he would be expelled for trespassing in an abandoned house? But the question was already answered before he'd fully asked it. He needed to know. Dumbledore had been keeping secrets. Snape had been keeping secrets. Draco had been keeping secrets. And now Draco's mother was keeping secrets in an abandoned house in Hogsmeade, and Harry needed to understand why. Behind the tapestry was a doorway, and beyond that, a set of stairs descending into darkness. The tapestry itself was old but well-maintained, its colors still vibrant in the light of the floating candle. Black and silver house colors. Black and silver like Slytherin, like Draco's family. Like a message, left deliberately for someone who knew how to read it. The candle continued its journey downward, growing smaller and more distant as it went. Harry took the stairs slowly, one hand on the wall, feeling his way in the darkness. The temperature was dropping as he descended. His breath was coming in visible plumes now. He could feel the weight of the stone around him, pressing down from above. Underground. He was going underground, into the depths of the earth where no one would hear if he screamed. The thought was claustrophobic and terrifying and strangely exhilarating all at once. He was closer now. Whatever this was, he was almost there. The cellar was warm. That was the first thing that registered in Harry's mind, and the wrongness of it made him pause mid-step. The rest of the house was bitter cold, the kind of cold that came from disuse and winter and the gradual erosion of all living warmth. But as he descended the last few stairs, following Narcissa at a distance that made his heart pound in his chest until he thought it might shake the cloak right off his shoulders, he could feel warmth radiating from somewhere below. Real warmth. The warmth of a fire charm, or perhaps a heating charm renewed regularly. At the bottom of the stairs was a door. It was a heavy oak door, well-maintained, polished even, and it was covered in locking charms. Harry counted 7 of them as Narcissa approached. The standard privacy wards that any wizard of means might cast, plus several others that made his scalp prickle. They glowed faintly in the candlelight, their runes precise and recent. Someone had renewed these charms regularly. Someone had taken great care to make sure nothing could get in or out. The complexity of the spellwork suggested someone who knew exactly what they were protecting against. This was serious magic. This was the kind of magic that required knowledge, power, and desperation in equal measure. Narcissa approached the door and began murmuring counterspells. Her voice was steady and low, and she moved with the precision of someone who had done this many times. Each charm disengaged with a small, musical sound, like a lock being opened, like something coming undone. 7 separate sounds, 7 separate spells, all of them precise and correct. Harry tried to memorize the sequence, running the spells over in his mind, but his attention was fragmenting. His mind wasn't working properly. Nothing was working properly. Nothing made sense. Why was Draco's mother, pureblood, Slytherin, Death Eater if the rumors were true, alone in an underground cellar casting and uncasting privacy wards? What could possibly be valuable enough to require this level of protection? Or dangerous enough? Or important enough? The questions were piling up faster than he could process them, each one more impossible than the last. The last charm disengaged. The door swung open. Harry heard Narcissa sigh, a sound of relief so profound that it transformed her entire face in the candlelight. For just a moment, she looked like a different person. Younger, afraid, human. All the careful composure, all the aristocratic control fell away. What remained was something raw and vulnerable and utterly exhausted. And underneath that, something else, something that looked almost like love. Then she stepped through. The candle followed her. Harry stood in the darkness for perhaps 5 seconds, his mind warring with itself. Follow her, and risk being discovered in a place he absolutely should not be. Risk stumbling into something that had nothing to do with Draco or Snape or the Dark Lord or any of the threats that actually concerned him. Risk getting expelled. Risk dying. Or retreat and never know what Draco's mother was doing in an abandoned townhouse in Hogsmeade, casting privacy charms like she was protecting something worth dying for. Never understand any of it. He followed her. His hands were shaking as he moved. The room beyond was small and warm, and it was without question the warmest thing Harry had seen in the entire house. A portable heating charm, probably, renewed regularly. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and there was a rug on the floor, a small, cheerful rug in shades of blue and green that looked like a meadow or a forest, something alive and growing. The paint and the rug seemed to belong in a different world entirely from the rest of the house. From the abandoned, dusty, dying world above. A narrow bed, neatly made with a quilt that had been carefully patched in places. The patches were visible. Narcissa Malfoy didn't have the talent or patience for mending, so these patches had been done by someone else. Careful, neat patches, suggesting care and devotion. A desk with a stack of books beside it, real books, bound and used and loved, their spines bent from repeated reading. A small wooden figure of a tin soldier, standing at attention on the windowsill, painted in careful detail with individual brushstrokes visible even from a distance. And on the walls, small pencil drawings of butterflies and flowers, done in a careful childish hand, covering nearly every inch of available space like small declarations of hope. And a girl. She was 8 years old, perhaps 9, with dark hair and dark eyes that seemed too sharp, too aware for a child. Too old for a child. She looked up from the book she was reading, something with a bright cover that Harry didn't recognize, and her face transformed with pure, uncomplicated joy. It was a look that transformed her entire being, that made her seem genuinely happy for the first time since Harry had laid eyes on her. "You're late," she said. Her voice was clear and uncomplaining, just a statement of fact. It was the voice of a child who had learned not to make demands, but who had also learned to notice things, to track patterns, to understand the world through careful observation. "The snow has stopped. I was watching it from the window. I counted the snowflakes until I got bored. I had a party to be seen at," Narcissa replied. She was already moving, setting down a package wrapped in brown paper, beginning to unpack its contents with the care of someone removing treasures from a sacred place. A loaf of bread, some cheese, a wrapped package that might have been butter. Items purchased carefully, probably not all from the same shop. Mundane enough that no one would notice them or remember them later. No pattern that would suggest anything unusual. The girl stood up from her bed, stretching, and Harry saw that she moved with the careful economy of motion that suggested she spent most of her time in this small room. She wasn't sickly, her movements were strong and coordinated, but she had the look of someone who had learned not to take up space, not to be a bother, not to be remembered. "Is it snowing?" she asked. She moved to the desk and stood there, not quite approaching Narcissa, but close enough to watch, close enough to notice every detail. "Can we still make snowballs?" "Very much," Narcissa said. She had set down the food and was now producing a book, a new book by the look of it, its pages crisp and unread, still holding that indefinable smell of newness. "I thought, if the snow continues through tomorrow, we might be able to build snowballs. The kitchen window opens to a fire escape. No one ever looks at that part of the garden. We could press the snow against the window from the inside. You wouldn't even have to go outside. You could see the snow. You could touch it without anyone knowing you were there." The girl's face brightened further, a smile appearing that made her look more like a normal child and less like something from a fever dream, more like a girl who had permission to be a girl. "Really? You promise?" "I promise," Narcissa said. She set down the book carefully on the desk and then reached out. Her hand touched the girl's hair gently, briefly, the gesture holding such tenderness that Harry had to look away from it. It was too intimate. Too real. It contradicted everything he knew about Narcissa Malfoy. It suggested something he couldn't quite comprehend, that she loved this child, that she was capable of love. "What's the book?" the girl asked, picking it up and examining it carefully. The cover showed a forest and a girl in a red dress walking deeper into it. "Oh, this one looks good. Are there pictures inside?" "Several," Narcissa said. "I thought you might like it. There's a girl who gets lost in the forest and finds a cottage." "Is it a scary story?" the girl asked, clutching the book a little tighter, her fingers digging slightly into the cover. "Not too scary," Narcissa said softly. There was a tenderness in her voice now, something almost maternal. "But it has adventure and magic, and the girl is brave, just like you." "I like brave stories," the girl said. She tucked it under her arm like a treasure, holding it close to her chest, and then, to Harry's complete shock, she moved toward Narcissa and hugged her. A real hug, unself-conscious and genuine, the kind of hug that a child gives to someone they trust completely. The kind of hug that speaks of love, of safety, of home. "Thank you, Narcissa. You're the only one who brings me things. You're the only one who remembers." Harry's foot caught on a board. It was a small sound, nothing more than a creak, a single board settling under his weight. In the absolute silence of the cellar room, in the moment of quiet domesticity that had just unfolded, it might as well have been a thunder spell. Narcissa went rigid. The girl looked up, her sharp eyes suddenly uncertain, and Narcissa moved. It was extraordinary, the speed of it. One moment she was standing there, tenderness still softening her features, and the next she had shoved the girl behind her with surprising force and her wand was up. The movement was so sudden and so violent that Harry's mind couldn't quite process what was happening. Her eyes were wide and furious and utterly, completely terrified. "Who's there?" she demanded. Her voice was ice cold and dangerous. "Show yourself, now." Harry pulled the cloak off slowly. The silver material pooled around his feet like water, and for a moment there was nothing but absolute silence. The silence of the world coming to an end. The silence of crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Potter," Narcissa breathed. It wasn't a question. Her wand didn't waver, but her hand was shaking visibly. "Potter, you arrogant, interfering. What is this?" Harry heard his own voice, high and strange and shocked. He sounded like he had when he was 11 years old and seeing magic for the first time. "What is happening? Why is there a who is that?" the girl asked. She was peering around Narcissa's robes, her sharp eyes fixed on Harry with the kind of assessment that made him feel about 5 years old, caught out and foolish. "Is he a friend?" "A boy who is going to ruin everything," Narcissa said flatly. She didn't look away from Harry, but her shoulders had curved around the girl as if she could shield her with her own body. As if she could protect her from the world simply by positioning herself correctly, by making herself into a barrier between the child and all harm. "Get back, Potter. Warn me before you try anything stupid." I don't." Harry ran a hand through his hair, gesturing uselessly. His wand was still in his hand, though he couldn't remember drawing it. The room seemed to be spinning around him, and the only thing that was solid was this moment, this impossible moment. "Why is there a child in your cellar? What are you doing? Is she a prisoner? Did you—" "I'm not a prisoner," the girl said firmly. She stepped out from behind Narcissa's robes with evident courage, and Narcissa made a small, wordless sound of distress. "I like it here. Narcissa brings me books and food, and sometimes we read stories together, and we're going to make snowballs tomorrow, and she promised to teach me how to draw butterflies better." Narcissa. The girl called her by her given name, not Mrs. Malfoy or Madam. Narcissa, like they were family, like they were friends, like they were all the family either one of them had, like the girl felt safe enough, loved enough to use her name. Harry's mind was fragmenting into 1,000 scattered pieces, none of them connecting properly. "I would rather not have to hex you," Narcissa said quietly. Her voice had shifted into something harder, something more dangerous. "But I will. If you threaten her, if you tell anyone about her, I will hex you without hesitation, and I will make sure you never reach another healer. So I suggest you think very carefully about what you do next, Potter." She meant it. Harry could see it in her face, in the set of her shoulders, in the absolute certainty of her voice. She would kill him to protect this child. The thought was so staggering that he actually took a step back. "What's your name?" the girl asked Harry. There was something brave in her voice, something that suggested she'd learned long ago how to talk to adults who were angry or afraid. It was a courage that seemed too old for her small frame. He stared at her. "What?" "Your name," she repeated, with the patience of a child addressing an idiot adult. "Narcissa won't tell me. She just says you're trouble. But everyone says that about everyone, and mostly they're just people." "Harry," Harry said stupidly. My name is Harry." The girl nodded solemnly. "I'm Iris. That's not my real first name, but Narcissa says it's better if I have a different name. Safer, in case anyone hears anyone else mention me." "Iris, go back and read," Narcissa said. There was steel in her voice now, a firmness that suggested she had learned to give commands in this small room and have them obeyed. "Please, go to bed." "You have a book to start." Iris didn't move immediately. She studied Harry for a long moment, her dark eyes sharp and assessing, taking in every detail with the careful attention of someone who had learned that details mattered, that noticing things could keep you safe. Then, with the kind of bravery that seemed far too large for her small frame, she turned and headed toward the bed. She paused at the edge of it, watching Harry over her shoulder, as if she was trying to determine whether he was the kind of adult who was dangerous or just the kind who was confused. Apparently satisfied that he wasn't an immediate threat, she climbed under the covers, her new book clutched to her chest like a talisman. She didn't look away from him until the quilt was pulled up to her chin. Very slowly, Narcissa lowered her wand. She didn't release it entirely. Her fingers remained tight around the wood, white-knuckled with tension, but she lowered the tip toward the ground. And then, like a marionette with its strings cut, she sank down to the rug. She didn't collapse theatrically. Her legs simply stopped working, and she knelt there, her robes spreading around her, her wand hanging loosely in one hand. It was the gesture of someone whose reserves had been completely exhausted, who had nothing left to give. She stared at the wall opposite her, and when she spoke, her voice was the flattest thing Harry had ever heard. It was worse than anger. It was worse than fear. It was the voice of someone whose strings had been cut permanently. The voice of someone reciting a story they had told themselves so many times that the emotions had been burned away, leaving only fact. "The girl's name is Iris Selwyn-Greaves," she said. "Her mother was a healer, a gifted one. She was working on a cure for dragonpox when Bellatrix Lestrange decided she needed to make a point about blood traders and their sympathizers. When the mother came home one evening from St. Mungo's, my sister was waiting in her home. She waited for hours. She said someone told me that it took her 6 hours to die. 6 hours of screaming, of pleading, of a woman being unmade slowly and deliberately while her daughter watched from under the stairs. The girl watched from under the stairs the entire time. She was 3 years old when it happened." Harry's stomach twisted. Bellatrix, Death Eater, mad as they came, violent as they came. And she had, "I was there," Narcissa continued. She was speaking to the wall, not to Harry. It was like she couldn't bear to look at him, like acknowledging his presence might break whatever thin control she had left, might let the emotions back in. "Not during. After. I found the girl the next morning, hiding in the dark under a corner of the stairs. She hadn't made a sound. She wouldn't speak for 3 months. When she finally made a sound, the first thing she said was, 'Am I going to die too?' I took her that day. Just took her. No one asked questions. Who counts one more child among the displaced? Who remembers one more Muggle-born whose parents are gone? Who cares about a child with nowhere to go?" She still didn't look at him. Her voice remained perfectly flat, perfectly controlled, like a recording of grief rather than the thing itself, like someone reading from a script they had memorized long ago, someone who had played this scene in their mind many, many times. "If you tell anyone about her, she dies," Narcissa said. "Not because I will kill her, because Bellatrix will find out, she finds out everything, she hears everything, and she will do to her what she did to her mother. Slowly, while I watch. Or perhaps she will let me live long enough to know it is happening, and that will be worse. That will be much worse than death. I would prefer to die quickly than live with that knowledge." Harry couldn't speak. His throat felt closed up, his mind unable to form thoughts. "I don't expect mercy for myself," Narcissa said. Her voice remained perfectly controlled, but her hands were beginning to shake. That was the crack in her composure, the place where she was breaking, where all the careful control was splintering. "I know what I am. I know what I have done. I know what the order would say if they found me, if they knew what I had harbored. I know what you will tell them. I know that I am complicit in countless deaths. The blood on my hands is real, and it is heavy, and it is deserved. But she is a child. She is innocent. She likes books. She wants to build snowballs. She draws pictures of butterflies on the walls, and I have to erase them every week so no one knows she is here. No one knows she exists. No one remembers that she lived, except for me." Narcissa's hands were shaking now, the first crack in her composure becoming a chasm that threatened to swallow her whole. She looked down at them like she didn't recognize them, these hands that had held a murdered woman's daughter, that had bandaged her wounds, that had learned to be gentle. And then she curled them into fists in her lap, trying to hold herself together by sheer force of will. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. It was a voice that held no hope, no expectation of mercy, only the desperate need to protect the one thing in the world she loved. The only thing that mattered. "Please, Potter," she said. "Not for me, for her. She didn't ask to be born Muggle-born. She didn't ask for her mother to die. She didn't ask for any of this. She just wants to read books and draw butterflies and be alive. Let her have that. I'm begging you." In the candle-lit cellar, with his wand still drawn and a Slytherin pureblood on her knees in front of him, Harry stood perfectly still and had absolutely no idea what to do. Everything he had thought he understood about the world, about good and evil, about who deserved mercy and who didn't, about right and wrong, had just been turned upside down and shaken until it made no sense at all. And the only thing he was certain of was that nothing would ever be simple again. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. Terms the wand didn't waver. Harry held it steady, though his hand was shaking so badly he could barely feel his fingers gripping the wood. Narcissa Malfoy remained on her knees on the cold cellar floor, her expensive robes pooling around her like spilled ink, her platinum hair curtaining her face. Behind her, in the doorway to the small back room, Iris watched with eyes too old for an 8-year-old's face. "Get up," Harry said. Narcissa didn't move. The cellar was silent except for the whisper of the ward light and the faint sound of water dripping somewhere in the darkness beyond the circle of illumination. It was late December cold down here, the kind of cold that seeped into bone and stayed. Iris was wearing a threadbare jumper that might have fit her once. Her arms were wrapped around herself. She had one hand raised to her mouth, and Harry realized she was biting her thumbnail, a nervous gesture so childishly human that it made something in his chest contract painfully. Harry realized he was staring at her and looked back at Narcissa. She still hadn't moved. Her shoulders curved inward, trying to make herself small to disappear into the stone itself. The Narcissa Malfoy he'd always known was sharp-edged and dangerous, the kind of beautiful that implied consequences. This kneeling woman was something else entirely, something diminished. It was worse than if she'd fought him. "I said get up," Harry said again, and his voice cracked on the words like he was 13 again instead of 16. Narcissa's shoulders stiffened slightly, but she still didn't rise. She was waiting for something, permission, perhaps, or absolution. The thought made Harry's stomach turn. He was 16. He wasn't supposed to be the one granting absolution. He lowered the wand slightly and then, feeling stupid, more than stupid, embarrassed in a way that burned through his anger like acid, he crouched down beside her. Not low enough to kneel as well, just enough to bring their eyes level. This close, he could see that she was trembling slightly. Could see the minute tension in her jaw that suggested she was holding herself together by force of will alone. "Get up, Narcissa," he said again, quieter this time. She raised her head. Her eyes were gray as the stone, and they held something that might have been relief or might have been calculation. Harry couldn't decide which was worse. She didn't move otherwise, just looked at him from that kneeling position, waiting for something else, some key or permission he didn't know how to give. "I'm not promising anything yet," Harry said. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, older than it should be, colder, flatter, like something essential had been removed from it. "You understand that. I came here because I needed to know if it was real. I still need to know that. I still need to understand what I'm looking at." "I understand," Narcissa said. Her voice was muffled slightly. "You owe me nothing." "That's not," Harry felt a flush of frustration. "Just get up, please." Something in the please seemed to reach her. She got to her feet then, a smooth motion without using her hands, the kind of movement that came from pure breeding and early training in deportment. Perfect posture, perfect grace. She brushed an invisible speck of dust from her skirt with the deliberation of someone who needed the small ritual of movement to hold herself together. When she looked at him again, she was composed, unreadable, as if the kneeling had never happened or had happened to someone else entirely. Harry felt something twist in his chest. He'd been about to feel guilty. Now he just felt angry at her for not letting him, for making it that easy to shift back into the role, back into the armor. "I didn't ask you to kneel," he said. "No," Narcissa agreed. "You didn't." He turned to Iris in the doorway. The girl had lowered her hand from her mouth, but her arm was still wrapped around herself, and she was watching both of them with the careful, attentive gaze of someone who had learned to extract meaning from small gestures and held silences. Someone who had learned that danger often came quietly. "Back to bed," Harry said. His voice came out too sharp, and he tried to soften it. "Properly this time. You need to sleep." The girl flinched at his initial tone, but Narcissa's voice came out soft and sure, like a hand extended in darkness. "Iris, darling, go up. Mrs. Greengrass will have left the nightdress on your cot. It is cold tonight, and you will not sleep well if you are chilled." Iris looked between them, from Narcissa to Harry and back again, as if trying to gauge whether it was safe to move. Finally, she shuffled back into her small room. Harry caught a glimpse of it before she disappeared, a narrow cot with a patchwork quilt folded carefully at the foot, a small wooden shelf with what looked like 3 or 4 books, carefully arranged, a window that had been magically sealed shut, a cup of water on a nightstand, a small potted plant on the sill, very much alive. It was neat, clean, better cared for than he'd expected, which somehow made the whole thing worse. This wasn't a hasty hiding. This was commitment. This was love. The thought made him dizzy. Narcissa moved toward the stairs without waiting for him to respond, her robes whispering against the stone. Harry followed her up into the main floor of the house, his wand still drawn but no longer pointed at anything in particular. They emerged in a hallway lined with portraits whose eyes were closed by magical sleep, portraits of blacks, presumably, ancestors from the line that had produced both Narcissa and her sister. Harry didn't look at them too closely. The parlor was on the first floor. It was the kind of room that had probably been beautiful once, before it had been shut up and left to gather dust like a tomb. The furniture was still good, a deep sofa with carved feet that looked like it might be Victorian, or older, armchairs with worn velvet cushions in a deep burgundy color, side tables of dark wood that probably cost more than Harry's entire annual allowance. Everything was covered with sheets, making the room look like the lair of pale ghosts, like the furniture was sleeping and might wake at any moment. Narcissa moved to the fireplace. She paused for just a moment, her hand raised, and then without speaking a word or drawing a wand, without any visible incantation at all, she coaxed a fire to life in the grate. Harry saw it happen in its entirety, saw the way the flames bloomed from nothing, orange and gold and alive, spreading through the wood with an almost sentient urgency. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was the first time he'd seen her do magic. He realized, truly do magic, not shield spells or evasion but raw power, demonstrated without effort or performance. It was the kind of thing that made Dumbledore take you seriously, the kind of thing that reminded you why Death Eaters were dangerous in the first place. "You're not just hiding here," Harry said. It wasn't a question. "No," Narcissa said. She turned back to him, and in the firelight her face was a study in contrasts, hard planes and soft curves, youth and exhaustion, ice and something burning underneath. I am quite comfortably established here. I have been since October of 1943. The ministry has no record of it. The ministry has no record of many things. Would you like tea? Harry almost laughed. He did laugh, a sharp, jagged sound that surprised them both and echoed slightly in the high-ceilinged room. Tea, he repeated. You're offering me tea. I'm breaking into your house. I've found a hidden child. I've got a wand pointed at you, and you're offering you tea, Narcissa confirmed calmly. Yes, one of those things is not actually happening anymore. Your wand is no longer pointed at anything, and the other is, I confess, somewhat less dramatic when one actually sits down to discuss the matter rationally. Come, you look as if you might collapse. I will collapse as well, probably, when the adrenaline stops working. We might as well do it sitting down. She didn't wait for his agreement. She moved instead to a small side table where she'd somehow already prepared a tea service. A teapot of dark ceramic, 2 cups of white china with blue flowers, a small plate of biscuits that looked like they might have come from a magical bakery that actually cared about freshness. Harry didn't know how long she'd been planning for this moment, or if she simply kept supplies in this house for some other reason, some other kind of contingency. Sit, she said, and gestured toward one of the armchairs. Harry sat. The chair was more comfortable than he expected, the kind of furniture that was made in a time when comfort was not yet considered vulgar. He settled into it with the feeling of someone sinking into water. Narcissa poured without spilling a drop, even though her hands had to be as shaky as his, even though her whole careful facade was built on the willingness not to show it. She poured tea for both of them with the precision of someone who had been trained from childhood to pour tea, who could probably pour tea while being tortured and still come up with a perfect ratio of liquid to leaf. She handed him the cup, and then, watching his face with what might have been amusement or might have been calculation, she raised her own to her lips and drank. The steam rose between them like a barrier that might protect something or might conceal something dangerous. She drank deeply, not a sip but a genuine drink, then lowered the cup and set it on the arm of the sofa. Poison would be counterproductive, she said matter-of-factly. I need you alive. More than that, I need you cooperative. Cooperation is difficult to extract from corpses. Harry drank. The tea was black, strong, with a hint of something he couldn't identify, not honey, something more complex, something that probably had a French name. Not poison. He didn't know why her drinking from the cup first would have stopped him anyway. She could have spelled his cup differently, could have done any number of things. He was trusting her on nothing but a gesture and the logic that poisoning him would be strategically stupid. He was not trusting her because he believed her, he told himself firmly. The fire crackled between them. Somewhere in the house, he heard a floorboard creak, and then silence. Outside, somewhere in London, the world was going about its business. People were sleeping, going to work, living lives that didn't involve hidden children or Death Eaters or the weight of secrets that could get you killed. Sit, Narcissa said, not unkindly. We need to speak clearly. You will want terms. I would want terms in your position. Better to establish them now, while we are both relatively rational, than to waste time on negotiation and misunderstanding later. Harry set his cup down. It was still warm, and the smell of it drifted up in small wisps of steam. I have terms, he said. Of course you do, Narcissa replied. She looked almost amused, which was strange that she could find amusement in this at all. You are 16 and holding a wand. You are the boy who lived, which means you were trained from birth to believe that your will matters, that your judgment is sound, that the universe will arrange itself around your moral certainty. Of course you have terms. Don't do that, Harry said quietly. Do what? She was genuinely curious, he thought, or genuinely pretending to be. Dismiss me. Not now, not if you want my help. Narcissa inclined her head, a very slight movement that might have been acknowledgement or might have been mockery. But she didn't argue. Instead, she waited for him to speak, sitting on her sofa with her hands folded and her eyes fixed on his face, waiting to hear what the terms would be. I want information about Draco, Harry said. What he's doing at Hogwarts, anything you know about his task, what Voldemort wants from him. The name hung in the air between them. Voldemort. Not you-know-who, not the Dark Lord, not any of the euphemisms. Just the name, stark and real. Narcissa didn't flinch. I know very little. Bellatrix keeps him close about it, and Bellatrix does not trust easily. I know he has been given a task of some importance to the organization. Some test or trial that will elevate him within the hierarchy or prove him worthy of it. I know it was given to him before this term began, sometime in the summer when everyone was gathering again, and the manor was thick with dark magic and midnight meetings. I know the execution troubles him, though he hides this from his father as if it were a shameful thing, as if ambition were not the Malfoy inheritance. She paused, taking a small sip of her tea. I know he spends time in the room of requirement at Hogwarts, yes. I know it through methods I would prefer not to detail. I know his two companions know nothing of what he is doing there, which is unusual, because Draco has never done anything of importance without an audience to appreciate it. I know his shame is eating him from the inside, though he would rather die than admit it. Beyond this, I am in darkness as much as you are, likely more. They do not trust me with the details. They do not share their darkest work with women they suspect of harboring weakness. Harry absorbed this. It was more than he'd expected, and less. The room of requirement confirmed something he'd suspected. The task was real, was ongoing, was somehow beyond even Voldemort's usual level of dramatic revelation. But it didn't tell him what the task was, didn't tell him why Draco would be chosen for it, didn't tell him if there was a way to stop it. It didn't tell him if Draco could be saved or if it was already too late. You're his mother, Harry said. It came out sharp, accusatory, which he hadn't intended. You raised him. You have to know something more than this. Precisely, Narcissa replied, unmoved. I am his mother, which is why I cannot be trusted with secrets that might weaken his resolve if I harbored doubts about their righteousness or even their efficacy. Mothers soften things. Mothers protect their sons. Mothers create weakness. This is the axiom they operate under. This is what they believe, and they have made me believe it as well. I have made my son believe it. This is what I have learned by being allowed to raise Draco and then forbidden from actually knowing anything about him, from protecting him, from doing the one thing a mother should be able to do. So yes, I am his mother. And because of it, I am the last person they would tell. I am the risk. I am the weakness. I am the one who might love him too much to let him go through with whatever they have planned. Then how do you know what you know? Harry asked. If they're keeping everything from you, if you don't have access, how are you even aware of any of this? The same way any woman knows anything about the men she lives with, Narcissa said coolly. Through observation, through listening to conversations you are not meant to hear. Through understanding that what people do not say is often more important than what they do. Through fear. And through the fact that my sister is not subtle and not patient and not nearly as clever as she believes herself to be. She is a hammer, and she treats all problems as if they are nails. She cannot conceive of subtlety. She cannot imagine that a woman might simply be listening, remembering, connecting pieces of information the way a puzzle assembles itself slowly, inevitably. Harry wanted to ask more, but something in the way Narcissa said it made him understand that she had exhausted her patience for this particular line of questioning. She would tell him no more about her methods, about how she had gathered her intelligence. That was her protection, the knowledge of her sources, her techniques, the full extent of what she could do. That was the leverage she maintained over everyone else. It was smart. It was also, in a strange way, admirable. It was a damning assessment. Harry filed it away. He was beginning to understand that Narcissa Malfoy, despite her elegant appearance and her perfect control, was someone who had been thinking several steps ahead of everyone around her for a very long time. She had been calculating the angles, assessing the vulnerabilities, identifying the pressure points that could be exploited. She had done all of this while maintaining the facade of a devoted wife and a concerned mother, while playing the role expected of her. It occurred to him that this was perhaps more impressive and more dangerous than if she had simply seized power outright. "Second term," Harry said. "I want your word that you won't lie to me while this arrangement stands." "I will not swear an unbreakable vow," Narcissa said immediately. The response came so fast that he wondered if she'd been waiting for exactly this demand. "I am bound by another already. It is an old bond, made years ago, made in circumstances I will not detail. It prevents me from binding myself twice in such a way without consequence." The backlash of breaking an unbreakable vow while already bound to another would kill us both. It is a form of magical rejection, like putting two opposing forces into the same space. It would work for a moment, and then it would tear us apart. "Then what?" Harry started. "I will swear on Iris," Narcissa said calmly. She turned to look at the stairs leading down to the cellar, as if she could see through the intervening walls and stone to the child sleeping below. "I will bind my word to that child's safety. I will make a magical oath, not an unbreakable vow, but something close, something real. I will swear that if I break my word to you, if I lie to you while this arrangement stands, the consequences will touch her. The magic will fall on her if I misuse your trust. You know me well enough to understand that this is more absolute than any contract, more binding than any vow made of nothing but words and wandwork. If I break faith with you, Iris suffers. You will know it, and you will act accordingly." Harry didn't move for a long moment. He understood exactly what she was offering and understood the cost of it. She was putting the child's safety directly on her word, making the stakes personal in the way that nothing else could be personal. She was saying, "My love for her is stronger than anything else, so I bind myself to you through her." That was trust, or at least the closest thing to trust that someone like Narcissa Malfoy could offer. It was sickening. It was necessary. It was the kind of thing that meant she understood exactly what would matter to him, which meant she was far more dangerous than he'd given her credit for. She had weaponized her own love and positioned it as the solution, the guarantee, the magical contract that even an unbreakable vow couldn't provide. She had done this not because it was easy, but because it was the only way to make him believe her. Because she understood that the boy in front of her, the boy who had just discovered her secret, the boy who held her life in his hands, would care more about a child than about any technical magical binding. She understood him that well. She had read him that accurately. "All right," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I accept that. I accept the binding, and I accept what it means. Third term, I need to know there's a plan. If Bellatrix finds her, if things go wrong, if someone discovers what you've done and comes looking, we need a way to get Iris out of the country. Somewhere safe. Somewhere that Voldemort's reach is short and getting shorter. Some kind of exit strategy, some way of moving her that doesn't leave a trail." Narcissa was silent for a moment. She rose and moved to the fireplace, extending her hands toward the flames as if she were cold, though the room was perfectly warm now. Her fingers were long and pale and perfectly manicured, the fingers of a woman who had never had to do anything with her own hands if she could help it. "I have contacts," she said slowly, not looking at him. "From before the world ended. Friends of my family, or friends of friends, or people who are bound to the family by old debts and older loyalties. Some of them are in France, some are in Switzerland. One is in Argentina, though I would hesitate to send a child so far from everything she knows, even if it were necessary. Some of them are willing to help, if it comes to necessity. They do not know what I am asking exactly, but they understand that I am asking something, and they are willing to answer if I call. I have money that Bellatrix does not know I have. I have access to vaults that are not in the family name. I have a way into the continent if we need it, favors owed, compulsions made, people who understand that the world is changing and that it is wise to have allies in unexpected places." "But you don't have a concrete plan," Harry said. "But I do not have a concrete plan," Narcissa agreed. She turned back to face him. "Nor will I create one until I understand better what you think you are doing here. Are you intending to keep her in hiding until the war ends?" until our side loses and the purebloods inherit the earth and Iris grows into a woman with no memory of the sun? Or are you proposing something else? Because I will not commit my resources and my contacts to postponement. Postponement is just slow death with better scenery. If you are serious about this, if you are serious about her, then I need to know that you have thought beyond the next week, the next month. Terry had not thought that far ahead. He had not thought at all, really. He had reacted. He had followed her, had seen the child, and something in him that had been holding together with determination and spite and stubbornness had cracked open. He had seen Iris, a small girl with her hands wrapped around herself, with eyes that had seen too much, and suddenly postponement was not acceptable, and keeping her hidden until the war's end was not acceptable, and watching her grow into a woman with no memory of the sun was not acceptable. The thought of it made him angry in a way that went beyond the normal bounds of his rage. It made him want to do something, anything, to change the trajectory of this girl's life. "Help me figure out what comes next," he said. "That's part of the arrangement. You help me figure out what to do with what I've learned." "I can do that," Narcissa said. "But you should know what you are asking. You are asking me to be complicit in my sister's enemy. You are asking me to preserve a Muggle-born child while my family goes to war to erase them. You are asking me to risk my son's life on the hope that you, a 16-year-old boy who has already made more enemies than most adults will make in a lifetime, can keep a secret that will get him killed if discovered. You are asking me to become a traitor to my own blood." "You already are a traitor," Harry said. "Iris is proof of that." "Yes," Narcissa said. There was no bitterness in it, just acknowledgement. "I am, and I have been for 2 years. The question now is whether I am a traitor in isolation or a traitor with an ally, whether I am running a private rebellion or a conspiracy." "What do you think?" Harry asked. Narcissa smiled. It was a small smile, and it contained no warmth whatsoever. "I think," she said, "that you are standing in my parlor, wet from the snow and exhausted from the journey, still holding your wand like you might need to use it despite the fact that I have disarmed you in every way that matters. I think that you have not reported me to your headmaster, despite being his student and supposedly his confidant. I think that you came alone, that you have told no one, that you are capable of compartmentalizing your life in a way that most adults never manage. I think you are exactly what someone like me needs." "What does someone like you need?" Harry asked. "An ally who understands that the world is complicated," Narcissa said. "Someone who knows that good and evil are not always written in stone, and sometimes the person standing in front of you doing something monstrous is doing it for reasons you can sympathize with, even if you cannot condone the action. Someone who knows, with absolute certainty, that there are things more important than loyalty to their house, and will act accordingly." The conversation stretched on into the small hours. Harry found himself asking things he hadn't meant to ask, found Narcissa responding to each question with a kind of cold precision that was almost hypnotic. She told him about Draco in fragments, pieces of information that assembled slowly into a kind of portrait of a boy under impossible pressure. Draco was 17 now, nearly 18. He had been given a task by Voldemort himself, not by a subordinate, not by a message passed through intermediaries, but directly, face to face, in a meeting that Narcissa had not witnessed but whose aftermath she had observed. Something that meant more than school, more than the family's survival, more than honor. Something that meant his own path within the organization, his own acknowledgement of the power he was capable of wielding. Narcissa did not know what it was. She suspected it was dangerous. She suspected her sister knew more than she did, which meant Bellatrix was keeping information from her on purpose, which in the complicated politics of their family meant Bellatrix suspected her of disloyalty. She suspected because Narcissa had been distant. She suspected because Narcissa had taken long journeys without explanation. She suspected because she was Bellatrix and Bellatrix had stopped trusting people decades ago. Why would she suspect that? Harry asked. That you'd betray her. Because I have been, Narcissa said simply. Because on some level she is right about me." Harry sat with that for a moment. "Voldemort visits the manor. Yes, not often, 3 times since the summer. He stays for hours at a time, and afterward the servants are confined to their quarters, and the house is locked down with wards that would burn a lesser wizard to ash if they tried to cross them. Draco is always present. He leaves diminished." "What do you mean, diminished?" Narcissa set her teacup down. She was quiet for so long that Harry thought she might not answer. Then, slowly, she said, "Exactly that. He leaves diminished. Smaller somehow, as if something has been taken from him that he cannot name. It is the look of a boy who understands, for the first time, what he has dedicated his life to serving. It is the look of someone who has met the object of his faith and found it wanting. Or perhaps found it exactly what he feared it would be, and now has to continue on anyway because stopping would mean admitting that he was wrong." Harry remembered Draco as he'd been at the start of term. Thinner, yes, and harder in some ways. But also, Harry saw it now that she'd said it, diminished. Like the air had been let out of him. Like he was going through the motions of being Draco Malfoy while something essential had been removed, stored somewhere safe, locked away until he was old enough to understand why it had been taken. "What's it like?" Harry asked. When Voldemort laughs." Narcissa set her teacup down. She rose and moved to the fire, staring into it as if it might contain answers. She was quiet for so long that Harry thought she might not answer. The fire crackled and spat, consuming wood and sending sparks up into the chimney. "It is the sound of everything you love being negotiable," she said finally. Her voice was very soft, barely above a whisper. "It is the sound of a man who has removed from himself the last constraints of human morality, who can find amusement in suffering, because he is no longer constrained by the empathy that suffers alongside it. It is the sound of the world ending. And the worst part, the truly worst part, is that you can hear in it a kind of joy. A genuine, exuberant joy that he has become what he wants to be, a creature free of conscience, free of the weight of caring about anything except his own power and his own will. It is beautiful and terrible, and it is the most horrible sound I have ever heard." Harry didn't know what to say to that. He thought about Voldemort as he'd known him, as he'd seen him, in the graveyard, in Dumbledore's memories, in the depths of his own nightmares. He thought about a man who had removed his humanity like some people removed their coats. "Why did you take her?" he asked instead. "Iris, why her? Why now? Why not just leave her where she was?" Narcissa didn't answer immediately. She continued to stare into the fire, and Harry began to think she wouldn't answer at all. Then she started speaking, and her voice was flat, clinical, as if she were recounting a recipe she'd learned long ago. "Bellatrix murdered the mother in front of her on a Tuesday in October, 2 years ago. A Tuesday that was unremarkable in every way except that a woman and her daughter died. The mother had been a healer. The husband was a healer, I think, or something similarly respectable and useless. They were Muggle-born, or one of them was, which was apparently sufficient reason for investigation. Bellatrix had been hunting rumors, looking for resistance, looking for the kind of hidden defiance that justified her more. Aggressive questioning techniques." Narcissa's voice was steady. She might have been recounting something that had happened to someone else entirely. Bellatrix did not need to look for the child. She was careless. She was already bored. She was satisfied with her kill and moving on to the next hunt. The mother had hidden Iris in a cupboard before the spell came. A cupboard, can you imagine it? The best protection she could offer her own child. A cupboard under the stairs, the kind of thing that exists in every house. The kind of thing no one looks in because it is too obvious, too pathetic. Iris was 8 years old then, which she still is, which she will be for some time yet. She would eat the tinned goods, I imagine, until they ran out. Then she would have died of thirst or hunger, depending on what was available. "You found her there?" Harry asked. "I found her the next day," Narcissa said. She turned back from the fire. "I had no business being in that street. I had taken a pretext, a social call on a woman who no longer exists, which was useful because it explained my presence if anyone had been watching. If anyone had thought to question why Narcissa Malfoy was making a daylight visit to a street where dead Muggleborns lay like autumn leaves. The house was in disarray. The Ministry had not yet cleared it. Someone had been through it, looking for anything valuable. I supposed I was looking for silver or something equally stupid and vain. Instead, I opened a cupboard and found a girl with her hands pressed over her ears, asleep, wearing a dress that smelled like her mother's blood. She stopped there. The fire crackled between them. I do not know what made me open the cupboard, Narcissa continued quietly. I do not know what made me not close it again. I do not know what made me arrange for her to be brought here, or why I set up the cellar the way I did, with the books and the room and the small attempts at a life. I have had 2 years to consider these questions, to analyze my own motivations, and I have stopped pretending that the answer matters. She was there. She was alone. She would die in that cupboard, or later, whenever someone bothered to look properly, or when Bellatrix came back for a second look and actually paid attention. I decided to prevent that. Whatever my reasons, whatever my motivations, I decided that this child's death was not acceptable. She said it the way another person might describe choosing a different teacup from a shelf, with practical simplicity and no particular investment in the outcome. "Do you regret it?" Harry asked. "Every single day," Narcissa said. "And not at all. The two cannot be reconciled, and so I have stopped trying. Regret implies a desire to undo something. I have no such desire. I would do it again. At the same time, I regret every day that she is not safe, that she is not in some country where she can grow up and become a woman without fear. I regret that her mother is dead. I regret that there is a man with so much power that he can order the death of a family for the crime of being born in the wrong circumstances, and that no one can stop him. I regret that my sister is that man's instrument and my brother-in-law is that man's ally. But I do not regret taking Iris. That was the one correct decision I have made in 20 years. The conversation stretched on into the small hours. Harry found himself asking things he hadn't meant to ask. Questions about Bellatrix, about the organization, about how Narcissa had managed to maintain this secret for 2 years without being discovered. And Narcissa found herself answering, or at least offering answers that might have been true or might have been carefully constructed half-truths designed to test how much he would believe. Somewhere in the exhaustion and the lateness and the sheer unreality of sitting in a shuttered manor house with a Death Eater's wife, Harry realized that he believed her. Not all of her, not everything she said, but the core of it, the reason, the necessity, the small, terrible act of rebellion, he believed that. He hated that he believed it. He hated worse the fact that she was right about him. He was good at keeping secrets. He was good at living double lives. He was good at compartmentalizing the boy he was supposed to be from the things he actually did when no one was watching. The fire had burned low when the wards pulsed. It was a gentle pulse, not an alarm, but Narcissa was on her feet instantly with the kind of reflexive speed that made Harry understand she'd been waiting for exactly this possibility, had been prepared for discovery since the moment he'd arrived. "Get under the cloak," she said. "Now!" Harry obeyed without thinking. The invisibility cloak slipped over him like a breath, and he found himself in the strange half-space of being present and unseen. He crouched in the corner by the bookshelf, not breathing, while Narcissa extinguished the fire with a gesture that was less spell and more command. The room went dark except for the faint gray light of the London night filtering through the heavy curtains. Footsteps in the hallway. The front door opening. Snape stepped in out of the snow. He was still in his robes, still carrying his cloak in one hand, and there was snow in his hair like salt. He looked every inch the figure from a Gothic novel, tall and thin, and carrying some essential coldness with him like a winter storm brought indoors. He looked around the hallway with the eyes of someone who had been here before and knew what he would find. He looked at Narcissa, and his expression didn't change. "Severus," Narcissa said. She sounded calm. She looked calm. Harry could not tell if this was real or performance, and the not knowing was perhaps the most terrifying thing yet. "You have been taking long absences," Snape said. His voice was quiet, which somehow made it more dangerous than if he'd shouted. Bellatrix has noticed. She has been asking questions about your whereabouts. She sent me to discover the truth. And have you discovered it? Narcissa replied. I have discovered that you have been keeping this house since the autumn of 1943, Snape said flatly. He was still looking around the room, seeing everything, cataloging what was there. I have discovered that you visit it with regularity. I have discovered that whatever you are doing here requires enough secrecy to bind yourself to it, but apparently not enough secrecy to escape Bellatrix's notice entirely. What I have not discovered is what you are hiding. Harry held absolutely still under the cloak. His heart was hammering against his ribs so hard he was certain they could hear it, certain that the sound was so loud it would give him away. He could see Snape from his position in the corner, could see the sweep of his black robes, could see the way the dark hair fell across his face, could see the pale eyes moving across the room like searchlights. Don't ask, Severus, Narcissa said quietly. Snape regarded her for a long moment. Then he inclined his head slightly, as if conceding a point in a debate that had happened some time ago and had never quite been resolved. Whatever it is, he said, his voice even quieter than before, get rid of it before she finds it. She is closer than you think. He turned and walked back out into the snow. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. Narcissa sat down on the bottom stair, and Harry saw her bones give out, watched her settle onto the cold stone step like a woman for whom all the strength required for standing has suddenly become too much. She was breathing hard. Her hands were shaking. Harry pulled off the cloak. He didn't tell you to get rid of her, Harry said very quietly. He told you to move her. Narcissa didn't answer for a long time. The hallway was silent except for the sound of her breathing, still hard, still ragged. Yes, she said finally. Is he on Voldemort's side or Dumbledore's? Harry asked. He is on his own side, Narcissa said without lifting her head. He always has been. The mistake is thinking that side is small. Harry absorbed this. He thought about Snape, about all the things he didn't understand, about the way the professor had looked at him once with an expression that might have been hatred or might have been something more complicated. He thought about Dumbledore's strange faith in Snape, about the fact that Dumbledore had known this house existed, or might know, or might have known once and decided not to act. He thought about the line that kept echoing in his head. Whatever it is, get rid of it before she finds it. She is closer than you think. That wasn't an order to kill Iris. That was a warning. That was Snape telling Narcissa to move the child before Bellatrix found her, before the secret was exposed. That was Snape protecting her. I will help you move her, Harry said. If it comes to that, if Bellatrix gets too close, I will help you get her out. I will help you figure out the logistics, the planning, the execution. When you need to move her, you come to me, or you send word, or you find some way of contacting me that doesn't risk either of us. And I will help. Narcissa looked up at him. There was something in her expression that he couldn't quite read, gratitude, perhaps, or recognition, or the exhausted acceptance of someone who has been given a reprieve they did not believe they deserved. Thank you, she said, then corrected herself. Number, that is not right. That is not the word that fits what I feel. But I will use it anyway because there is no better word available. She said his name then, Harry, and it sounded strange in her mouth, not quite right, like she was trying out a word in a foreign language, like she was testing whether the familiar could become intimate. It sounded like it mattered that she was trying. They both pretended not to notice. He left before dawn. The snow was falling thick, covering the streets in white, erasing the tracks he'd made on the way into the house. He retraced his steps carefully, moving through the sleeping city with the paranoid precision of someone accustomed to working alone, to being seen by no one. His mind was moving in circles, chasing implications he didn't want to catch. Snape knew. Dumbledore might know. The organization was tightening its noose around Narcissa, and she was running out of time. By the time he reached the Honeyjuke's basement, the sky was starting to lighten. The first faint streak of gray was just beginning to show above the mountains, that terrible, beautiful moment when night becomes morning, and you realize you've been awake for far longer than you meant to be. It showed the mountains in silhouette, showed the snow-covered grounds of Hogwarts spreading out below them like a quilt of white and gray. He felt the weight of it settling on his shoulders like a cloak, the weight of having become someone Dumbledore would not entirely recognize. The weight of having made a choice that would reverberate for the rest of his life. The common room was empty when he climbed through the portrait hole, except for Hermione, who was sitting by the dying fire with Crookshanks curled up in her lap, both of them waiting as if they'd been waiting all night. Her eyes were red-rimmed. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had spent hours wondering where he was and had come up with increasingly terrible explanations. She looked up as he came in. "Where have you been?" she asked. Her voice was very level, very controlled. "I couldn't sleep," Harry said. His first lie of the new arrangement felt heavy in his mouth, weighed down with the knowledge of where he'd been, what he'd done, what he'd agreed to. "I went for a walk, around the grounds. I needed to think." He watched it land. He watched her see it, process it, choose not to call him on it. Not yet. But the way she looked at him, careful, distant, sad in a way that made his chest hurt, told him that she knew, not what or where or why, but that he was lying, that something had changed, that the Harry who came back from his walk was not quite the same Harry who had left. "All right," she said, and turned back to the fire. Crookshanks meowed softly, as if in agreement. The cat's eyes followed him as he moved toward the stairs. Harry climbed the stairs to the dormitory. The castle felt different around him now, or he felt different inside the castle. He couldn't decide which was true. The staircases spiraled the same way they always had. The portraits still watched from their frames with the detached interest of the magically immortal. The corridors were the same corridors. The rooms were the same rooms, except nothing was the same shape anymore. Nothing would ever be the same shape again. Chapter 2, End. Chapter 3. The cabinet and the cellar, the dungeons, were always cold, but defense against the dark arts felt colder today. Snape stood before the class with his arms folded across his chest, his black robes falling like curtains, and something about the set of his shoulders made Harry's stomach clench before the lesson had even begun. They were practicing Patronus production, a topic Dumbledore had insisted upon for 6 years, despite Snape's clear disdain for anything remotely encouraging. The classroom smelled of stone and the faint copper tinge of old blood. Whether real or imagined, Harry could never quite determine. The windows were frosted over. Winter had settled into the castle like a guest who refused to leave. "Potter," Snape said, his voice soft in that particular way that meant danger. "You will demonstrate. Again." Harry had already failed twice. His Patronus had flickered into being, the silver stag, pale and trembling, before dissolving into wisps like smoke catching wind. Around the room, he felt the weight of watching eyes. Crabbe and Goyle looked vaguely pleased. Even Slytherin boys enjoyed watching Potter struggle. Pansy Parkinson had a small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Only Draco, hunched over his desk with his hands clenched into fists, showed no interest. That worried Harry more than he wanted to admit. He raised his wand. The incantation came easily enough. He had cast the spell 1,000 times, had seen it form perfect and solid in his mind's eye countless times. But today, when he called to the happiest memory he could summon, what surfaced instead was the image of Iris's face when he explained what a hobbit was. The delighted confusion, the way her eyes had widened at the description of the Shire, the realization, sickening and bright, that this child had spoken to almost no one in 2 years, that she had spent 2 years in a cellar with only one voice, one presence, while the world outside continued on without her. The Patronus formed, stag-shaped and trembling, then dissolved. "Again!" Snape commanded with the patience of a man who had nothing but time and disdain. Harry tried. He thought of Quidditch, of flying, of the wind rushing past his face, and the pure, simple joy of it. He thought of the first time he'd ever flown on a broomstick, when everything else had fallen away and there was only the motion and the freedom. The stag came again, stronger this time, more solid, its outline less wavering, but still it insubstantial. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds before fragmenting into silver smoke. He could feel Snape watching him, not with the distant interest a teacher might show a struggling student, but with something sharper, more focused. It was the look of a man who had heard something interesting in the silence and was trying to determine if it was worth investigating further. Snape's black eyes seemed to catch the light as he studied Harry's face, and Harry suddenly became aware of every thought he'd been having, every image that had surfaced unbidden in his mind. Your concentration is abysmal, Potter. You're defending your mind like a child with a tissue against a bludger, Snape said softly, and somehow the softness was worse than fury. A Patronus requires not just power but focus, control, the ability to hold one happy thought against all darkness, the ability to protect your own mind from intrusion. He let that last sentence hang in the air like a threat. Snape's eyes lingered on him for a beat longer than necessary, and Harry felt something cold slide down his spine. It wasn't cruelty. Harry had learned to read Snape's various cruelties long ago. This was something else. This was a man trying to read something hidden, picking at the locks of Harry's mind with a precision that made his skin crawl. Harry's occlumency shields, never his strongest suit, were in disrepair. He had let them fall months ago, had stopped practicing once the private lessons with Dumbledore had ended. Now, standing under Snape's gaze, he felt horribly exposed, as though his skull had become transparent and Snape could see everything layered inside. The cellar, the fire, Iris's small hand, Narcissa's voice, the cabinet sitting in darkness in the room of requirement. He thought of the cellar. He thought of Narcissa's sharp voice cutting through his explanations about hobbits. He thought of the cabinet. What did Draco's cabinet have to do with anything? And Snape's eyes seemed to sharpen further, tracking something behind Harry's own eyes, following the path of his thoughts like a hound tracking a scent. The pressure of it was immense. Harry imagined his shields slamming shut, imagined thick walls of stone and iron sliding into place, but the effort made his head ache. He was tired. He had been sneaking out of the castle every other night. His concentration was shot. His defenses were hanging by threads. Then, as abruptly as it had begun, Snape looked away. His eyes returned to the class with that familiar expression of disdain, and he moved to criticize Neville's Patronus, or attempt at one, with his usual cruelty. Longbottom, your Patronus is about as substantial as your mind, which is to say it barely exists at all. See me after class. But something had shifted. Harry felt it the way a sailor might feel the pressure change before a storm, that sudden, sickening understanding that something dangerous had just moved in his direction. Snape had found something interesting in that moment of lapsed shields, even if he didn't yet understand what it was. Worse, he now knew there was something to find. He would look for it, and Snape always found what he was looking for. The class finished mercifully. Harry packed his things with careful, mechanical movements, aware that he was still being watched from under the desk where Snape organized his materials. The corridors stretched long and empty in the afternoon light, and Harry had barely made it 20 paces from the classroom when Hermione appeared, stepping out from behind a suit of armor with the precision of someone who had been waiting. "Don't talk," she said immediately, falling into step beside him. "Not here, but you're being watched, and not just by Snape. Ron's been too distracted to notice, but that won't last. Lavender's attention span is shorter than his, thank gods." Harry said nothing. There was nothing to say that wouldn't incriminate him further. "You weren't at the kitchens," Hermione continued, keeping her voice low and steady as they climbed toward the tower. "I went by on the pretense of getting something for my headache. You hadn't been there in 3 nights. And when you came back the night before last, your robes smelled like lavender and old stone. Not the castle lavender, the kind that grows in gardens, old gardens." Harry's mouth was dry. He kept walking. "I'm not going to ask you where," Hermione said, and somehow that was worse than if she had demanded answers. "I'm not going to ask because I think you're in trouble, and I think knowing the details would make it harder to lie, and you should know that I'm excellent at lying when it matters. But you're going to have to do better than you're doing. Snape doesn't suspect anything yet, but he's starting to wonder, and if he starts looking for answers, he won't stop until he finds something. They reached the tower passage. Hermione stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "What I need from you," she said, "is the truth. Not the full truth if you can't give it, but I need you to tell me this isn't Draco. I need you to tell me you're not doing something that's going to blow up in all of our faces. And I need you to promise me that if something goes wrong, genuinely wrong, the kind of wrong that needs fixing, you'll let me know." Harry looked at his oldest friend, at the careful composure on her face, and understood that this was her asking for his trust in return. It was as much of a surrender as Hermione Granger could manage. "It's not Draco," Harry said quietly. "It's something I stumbled into. It's not easy to explain, and it's not safe for you to know more than that. But I need you to trust me for a few weeks, just a few weeks. And if it goes wrong, then you'll be the first person who knows," Harry promised. "Before anyone else." Hermione extended her hand. Harry took it and they shook, a formal, old-fashioned gesture that meant more than words. "Do better," she said, "and try not to die." 2 nights later, Harry crept out from Gryffindor Tower with the invisibility cloak draped over his shoulders like wings. The castle was silent, the portraits sleeping, the suits of armor standing sentinel over empty corridors. He had a package under his arm, small, flat, carefully wrapped in brown paper. The copy of The Hobbit he'd found in the Room of Requirement had called to him the moment he saw it. Among the towers of magical theory and dark arts tomes, this one small mortal book had stood out like a key in a lock, and he'd known, with absolute certainty, that Iris needed it. The journey to Hogsmeade seemed to take longer each time he made it. The cold pressed down on him from every side, and twice he heard prefects on patrol and had to press himself against the corridor wall and hold his breath. By the time he pushed open the secret passage in the one-eyed witch statue, his fingers were numb, and his heart was hammering. The townhouse was exactly as he remembered it, shabby, forgotten, the kind of place that people's eyes slipped past without really seeing. He used the key Narcissa had given him and descended into darkness, his wand held low, until he reached the cellar door. It opened to warmth and firelight. Iris was sitting cross-legged on the rug before the small hearth, the light catching the copper in her hair. When she saw him, her face split into a grin so wide it seemed to transform her entire expression. "You came back," she said. "I thought you might not. I thought maybe you would decide to stop." "I said I would," Harry replied, pushing back his hood and unwrapping the package. "I brought you something." He held out the book, and Iris took it with careful hands, examining the cover. "The Hobbit," she read aloud. "What is a hobbit?" Harry settled onto the rug beside her, and for the next hour he explained. He told her about Bilbo and the Shire and the Misty Mountains, about dragons and elves and the Lonely Mountain. He watched her eyes grow wide, watched her track each word with fierce concentration, as though she was trying to memorize not just the story but the experience of having it told to her. Her lips moved slightly as he spoke, as if she was tasting each word before it fully registered. "A hole in the ground," she repeated when he paused for breath. "Like the cellars here, but with chairs." "Better than these cellars," Harry assured her. "With round doors and green lawns outside and gardens where things grow. You can see the sky from the front door. There's a green hill with trees on it, and in the summer the grass would be warm under your feet." Iris's expression became almost dreamy. "Can you feel the sun there?" The question, so simple and yet so full of longing, made something in Harry's chest constrict. "Yes," he said. "All the time, the sun and the wind and rain if you go outside during storms." "I've never felt rain," Iris said matter-of-factly. "Not since. I don't remember when." Harry wanted to tell her that she would feel it again, that this basement was temporary, that there would be hobbits and green hills and rain in her future. But he couldn't make promises. He wasn't sure he could keep. Instead, he continued the story, describing the party at the Shire, the fireworks, the food, anything that would keep her mind occupied with beauty rather than the cellar walls. "The best thing about hobbits," he found himself saying, "is that they're small but they do important things. Big things. They change the world, even though no one expected them to. even though they were just ordinary people from a hole in the ground. Iris listened to this carefully. Even though they're small. Especially because they're small, Harry said. Because people underestimate them. She seemed to absorb this information as though it mattered deeply to her, as though she was filing it away for future reference. "Will I ever have a hole like that?" Iris asked eventually, when he had run out of new details to describe. The question was so small, so perfectly innocent, that it struck Harry like a physical blow. He understood in that moment that this child had been stolen from gardens and light and green lawns, and that whatever Narcissa had given her, safety, shelter, survival, it was nothing compared to what had been taken away. He realized, as he continued to explain the fundamentals of hobbits and their comfort-loving ways, that Iris had not spoken to anyone but Narcissa in 2 years. Not anyone. For 2 years, the only voice she had heard consistently, the only human presence beyond the woman who fed her and taught her, had been absent from her world. She had lived in this cellar with only one person to talk to, only one perspective on the world. No wonder she clung to each word he offered like water in a desert. No wonder her eyes tracked his movements with such intensity, as though she was afraid that if she looked away, he would vanish and she would be alone again. The realization knocked the breath out of him. He thought about what 2 years of silence and isolation would do to a child, what it would do to anyone. Narcissa had kept her alive, had kept her safe, but she had also kept her imprisoned. And now Harry understood that his presence here, his willingness to sit and explain hobbits and the Shire, was one of the few kindnesses this child had known in her entire young life. The cellar door opened without warning. Narcissa stood on the threshold, dressed in traveling clothes, her expression sharp enough to cut glass. "You were not invited," she said flatly. "You were not authorized to come alone." Harry straightened, still holding the book. Iris was lonely. Iris is safe, which is considerably more important than Iris being entertained. Narcissa's eyes were ice. She stepped into the cellar and closed the door behind her with deliberate softness. "You will not come without being summoned. You will not come alone. And you certainly will not come bearing gifts that might later be traced back to your possession. Have you given any thought to what happens if someone notices a book is missing from Hogwarts? Have you considered what would happen if Aurors began asking questions?" Harry felt heat creep up his neck. He hadn't, not really. He had been thinking of Iris's happiness, and Narcissa was thinking, always thinking, 3 steps ahead. "From now on, you use the side entrance," Narcissa continued, pointing to a corner of the cellar where a low door, almost invisible in shadow, stood barely 3 feet tall. "It connects to the old house elf network. The main passages have wards I cannot fully trust. Once you enter through there, you will walk directly here and you will not deviate. Understood?" "Understood," Harry said quietly. Narcissa raised her wand. Words came in a language Harry didn't quite recognize, old and crystalline, and he watched as silver light sketched itself across the cellar walls, settling into patterns and shapes that seemed to have their own logic. The wards were far more complex than anything he would have attempted. They were old magic, the kind that didn't just repel intruders but seemed to absorb them, to incorporate them into the fabric of the place itself. "Those will hold," Narcissa said, lowering her wand. "But only if you follow the protocols. Step outside them without permission, and they will know." Harry watched her work, and he saw things in the way her wand moved, in the precision of her incantations, that he had never quite grasped in a year of defense lessons. Snape was a master of dark magic, but Narcissa had something else, a kind of systematic elegance, as though she understood not just how magic worked but why. He found himself studying her hands, her wand movements, the barely perceptible shifts in her breathing that seemed to anchor each spell. "What are you looking at?" Narcissa asked without turning around. "Nothing," Harry said, but he had learned more in 10 minutes of watching her work than in a year of Snape's classes. The knowledge settled into him like something precious and dangerous. Iris watched the adults with solemn eyes, the book forgotten on her lap. Back at Hogwarts, alone in the darkness of his dormitory with his wand illuminating a small circle of parchment, Harry sat on the edge of his four-poster and replayed the evening. He thought about Iris's voice, small and wondering as she asked about hobbits. He thought about the way her hand had gripped the book like it was the most valuable thing in the world. And then he thought about what Narcissa had let slip as he was leaving, her voice sharp and frustrated in a way that suggested she wasn't quite guarding her words as carefully as she usually did. "The pair of cabinets," she had muttered, not quite to herself but not quite to him either. "Draco keeps talking about them in his sleep. The pair of cabinets. It's maddening not knowing what he's supposed to be doing with them." Pair of cabinets. Draco working on something. Something that could be divided into two matching pieces. Something important enough that Draco murmured about it even in sleep, even in the depths of whatever nightmares plagued Draco Malfoy these days. Harry's mind wouldn't let it go. He lay awake until past 3 in the morning, staring at the canopy of his four-poster, thinking about cabinets and pairs and the strange urgency in Narcissa's voice. What was Draco working on? What had Voldemort tasked him with? And why was it important enough to demand two matching pieces? Eventually, he rose quietly, pulled on his robes over his pajamas, and made his way to the room of requirement. The castle was a maze of passages at this hour, empty and echoing with his own footsteps. Twice, he heard the distant sound of portraits shifting in their frames, but he encountered no one. By the time he reached the room, his heart was hammering with a sense of purpose mixed with dread. He stood before the blank stone wall and walked past it 3 times, concentrating hard on what he needed. Show me where Draco has been working. Show me the things he hides. Show me the cabinet. The door appeared, sliding into existence as if it had always been there. He stepped inside and felt the familiar vertigo of entering a space that was larger than it should be. The room had transformed itself into something vast and chaotic, a warehouse of discarded treasures and forgotten things. There were stacks of furniture, towers of books, old suits of armor standing like sentries in the shadows. There were broken Muggle contraptions piled beside wizarding artifacts that no one had ever quite figured out how to use. There were portraits with their faces covered, trunks with locks that wouldn't open, and things that he couldn't quite identify in the darkness. He spent nearly an hour searching, moving through the clutter with increasing urgency. His wand light bobbed across surfaces, illuminating dust and forgotten history. And then, in a corner relatively clear of debris, he found it. The cabinet was small, beautiful, elegant in a way that made his breath catch. It was ornate, black wood with silver inlay that caught his wand light and threw it back in gleaming patterns. The craftsmanship was exceptional. Whoever had made it had understood not just magic but artistry. It stood beside a fireplace that no longer worked, its blackened brick opening onto nothing but shadow. Harry approached it slowly, as though it might bite him. Its twin, he understood immediately, must be somewhere else. Somewhere important. This was a pair that had been separated, that had been meant to connect. The cabinet was a door, or had been meant to become one. He reached out and opened it carefully, peering inside at the empty space. The interior was perfectly ordinary, wood, empty darkness, nothing remarkable. But he could feel the magic thrumming through it like a heartbeat, unfinished and dangerous and waiting. It was magic that hadn't been completed yet, but it was magic nonetheless. Old magic, intricate magic. The kind of magic that could do something extraordinary if it was finished properly. This was what Draco had been working on. This was the task Voldemort had given him. Harry understood it suddenly, with cold certainty that felt like ice water in his veins. A way in. A way through. A way to bypass the wards that protected the castle. A way to bring Death Eaters directly into Hogwarts, to reach any location they wanted to reach, to end the safety that had always been the castle's defining feature. He didn't yet understand the full scope of what the cabinet could do. He didn't understand the mechanism or the precise magic involved. But he understood enough. He understood that Draco had been tasked with one of the most important projects in the war. He understood that he was looking at a weapon that could fundamentally shift the balance of power. He understood why Draco looked so haunted, why his hands shook, why he was failing potions and sleeping badly. He stood in the darkness of the room of requirement, staring at an empty cabinet, and felt the weight of knowledge settle across his shoulders like snow. Like the weight of a secret he hadn't asked for. Like the weight of knowing something that could get him killed, and could get everyone he cared about killed right along with him. In the drawing room at Malfoy Manor, Bellatrix Lestrange sat beneath a portrait of Salazar Slytherin and sorted through a stack of intercepted Auror dispatches with the slow, methodical care of a cat separating feathers from flesh. The papers were encrypted, but nothing was truly encrypted against her. She had known the Ministry's codes for decades. The fire crackled in the hearth, and outside the windows, snow was falling on the grounds, thick, heavy, muffling snow that made the world seem even more isolated than usual. She had been tracking Narcissa for weeks now, ever since she'd noticed the pattern. The apothecary runs, the coded letters. The way Narcissa moved through the manor lately, distracted and furtive in a way that wasn't quite fearful but wasn't quite confident either. Something was happening. Something that Narcissa was keeping to herself. And Bellatrix had always found secrets particularly interesting. "Lucius," she called, her voice carrying through the manor like a bell, sharp enough to cut glass. "Come here." Lucius appeared in the doorway within moments, moving with the careful precision of a man who had learned exactly how much haste was appropriate in Bellatrix's presence. He wore dark robes, and his blonde hair was combed back from his face with its usual severity. His expression was carefully neutral, a mask of indifference that had been perfected over years of living in close quarters with someone who found entertainment in suffering. After the war, after so many battles won and lost, he had learned to show Bellatrix nothing of what he thought, to keep his opinions locked away and his face smooth as water. "Has Narcissa always taken so many trips to the apothecary?" Bellatrix asked, not looking up from her papers. Her fingers traced a line of code with the delicate precision of someone performing a spell. "In the last 2 months, there have been 7 journeys. 7, to the same apothecary in the same town. Hogsmeade, not the closest one to the manor, not by a considerable margin, and not even a particularly good one from what I can determine. Middling potions. Standard supplies. Nothing unusual. I was not aware of her comings and goings," Lucius said carefully. His voice was smooth, carefully modulated, revealing nothing. "You know how she is, always mysterious." Bellatrix looked up from her papers then, and her dark eyes were bright with something sharp and predatory. "She is," she agreed. "Mysterious Narcissa with her secrets and her coded letters and her sudden devotion to medical supplies. How fascinating that she should suddenly become so devoted to the apothecary. What do you suppose she's buying? Poisons, perhaps. Something to keep someone sedated. Or perhaps something to treat an illness. Antidotes. Ingredients for some lovely little family project that no one has bothered to mention to me." Lucius's expression flickered slightly, a minute tightening around the eyes that Bellatrix caught immediately. Good. So he wasn't entirely ignorant. Or at least, he suspected that there might be something to be ignorant about. She watched his face carefully, tracking the micro-expressions that flashed across it. She had become expert at reading faces, at seeing the truth beneath the carefully constructed masks. It was one of her favorite skills. "I think," she said softly, allowing her voice to drop to a tone that was almost conversational, "that I shall have to pay our sister-in-law a closer visit. Have a friendly chat with her about her health and her recent travels. See what amusing secrets she's been keeping. Don't you think that would be nice, Lucius? Sisterly bonding." "I would not presume to speculate on Narcissa's intentions," Lucius said, but something in his voice suggested that he was very much speculating, and that whatever he was speculating about made him nervous. Bellatrix smiled then, a smile that was not quite a smile, that contained too many teeth and not enough warmth. It was a smile that made men instinctively want to back away, to find exits, to cease existing in any space that she occupied. It was the smile of a woman who had discovered that someone was keeping secrets, and who had decided that this was unacceptable. "How delightful," she murmured, returning her attention to her papers. "I do so enjoy learning what Narcissa's been up to." The newspaper arrived at breakfast on a Thursday, and Harry's stomach clenched at the headline. A Muggle village in Cornwall had been attacked. 3 families dead. The details were sparse. The Ministry was still investigating. There was no confirmed evidence of dark magic, but everyone at the Slytherin table knew. Everyone at all the tables knew. Harry watched Draco across the Great Hall and saw the tightness around his eyes, the way his fork moved mechanically through eggs he wasn't eating. Draco's hands were shaking slightly, barely noticeably, but they were shaking. Snape sat at the high table, and his eyes were tracking Draco with an intensity that made Harry's breath stick in his throat. This was the look of a man who understood that something important had just happened, that one of his pieces had been moved on the board. And Harry was watching them both, and Hermione was watching Harry, and Ron was blissfully unaware, too concerned with whether Lavender was going to sit with him at breakfast to notice that the very fabric of the castle had just shifted. Hogwarts felt less like a school and more like a game of wizard's chess, and Harry understood, for the first time, that he was not just a piece on the board. He was the player and the board itself, and the stakes were far too high to count. That evening, a sprig of dried rosemary arrived in his morning post, wrapped in a scrap of parchment. No words. He understood immediately. He slipped out after midnight, through the tapestry passage and down the stairs, out into the frozen night. The walk to Hogsmeade seemed shorter when he was running. The side entrance opened at his touch, and he descended into darkness. Narcissa was waiting for him in the cellar, still dressed, her face carved from ice. "They made me identify families," she said, no preamble, no greeting. "The attack in Cornwall. The Death Eaters needed intelligence on which Muggle-borns had been hiding with certain families. I was asked to confirm information. I had a choice. Give a real name, or delay until someone else gave a real name and I would be suspect for my hesitation." She sat down on one of the hard cellar chairs, and Harry understood that she was not giving him the choice to reject this conversation. "There was an old colleague," Narcissa continued, her voice flat as stone, as cold as the winter night outside. She was sitting very still, her hands folded in her lap, her back perfectly straight. "A healer named Margaret Vane. She came from a Muggle-born family. I knew her slightly years ago. We studied together at the Healing Academy before I married Lucius. She was clever, perhaps too clever for her own good. She fled to France in October when the hunting began. I made the calculation that she would be unreachable, that her name would be safe to use." She paused. When she continued, her voice was barely above a whisper. "But I did not know for certain. I made the choice very quickly, Potter, in seconds. They demanded a name, and I gave one, and I calculated the probabilities and the time it takes to speak a sentence. Safe or unsafe. Likely to be contacted or likely to have already fled beyond the reach of the Dark Lord's networks. I made the choice based on what I knew, and people died in Cornwall tonight, and I do not know if Margaret Vane is alive or dead. I do not know if the Aurors who investigated have sent out inquiries to France. I do not know if my name, the name I invented out of desperation, led someone to her door, and if it did, I do not know if she was there to answer it." Harry's stomach was twisting. He wanted to look away, but he couldn't. This was what Narcissa did, he realized. This was the weight she carried. Not murder directly, but the blood on her hands from choices made in seconds, from the mathematics of survival, from being in a room where someone demanded information, and having to choose between betraying a stranger and betraying yourself. Narcissa stood up and walked to the small window of the cellar. It was set high in the wall, just at ground level, looking out onto the dark street of Hogsmeade. She stared out it as though she could see something in the darkness that Harry couldn't. "I want you to understand what I am," she said finally, and when she turned back to face him, her eyes were hollow. "I want you to understand before you commit to this. I am a woman who chooses between bad and worse. I am a woman who has made decisions that got people killed. People I did not know. People I had never met. People who are dead tonight because I used their names. I did not mean for those people to die. I did not pull a wand. I did not cast a curse. But they are dead nonetheless, and their blood is on my hands through mathematics and calculation and the simple fact that I chose to survive. And if you are going to defend this, defend me, defend Iris, then you need to understand that you are defending something you cannot absolve. Something that cannot be made right with words or choices or future good deeds. You are defending a woman who is complicit in murder. Harry felt sickness roiling through him, a deep, intestinal roiling that made him want to vomit. His hands were shaking slightly, but he didn't stand. He didn't walk out. He sat very still in the cellar chair, and he understood what Narcissa was offering, a choice to step away while he still could. She was showing him the worst of herself, the parts that were guilty and complicit and unable to be forgiven, and she was asking him to decide if he could live with knowing what she was. He thought about the people who had died in Cornwall. He thought about Bellatrix, delighting in cruelty. He thought about Voldemort, who took pleasure in suffering. He thought about Draco, working on a cabinet that would bring Death Eaters into Hogwarts. He thought about all the choices that led to death and darkness. "I understand what it is to choose between bad and worse," he said quietly. His voice was steady, even though his hands were not. "I've been doing it since I was 11 years old. I killed a basilisk because I had to. I've lied to the people I care about most. I've hurt people. I'll probably hurt more people before this is over. We're living in a war, Narcissa, a real war. And in a real war, people die. Sometimes they die because of choices that don't seem like choices at all. They're just the only option you have in a moment." "That does not make it better," Narcissa said coldly. "No," Harry agreed, looking her directly in the eyes. "It doesn't make it better. It doesn't absolve anyone. But it means I'm not going to stand in judgment of you for surviving. I'm not going to pretend I'm better than you are, because I'm not. I'm just a student who sneaks out of a castle at night to visit a girl I don't know in a cellar to feel like I'm doing something good. And I'm not going to absolve you, Narcissa. I'm not going to tell you it was the right choice. But I am going to write to Margaret Vane, in a script you won't recognize, using an owl that can't be traced. And I am going to warn her if she is anywhere to be warned. It might not be enough. It probably won't be enough. But I can do that." He stood up, and Narcissa didn't try to stop him. He walked to the small kitchen off the cellar, a space that was barely more than a closet with a small stove and shelves of supplies. He found paper in a drawer and ink on a shelf. He sat at the small table, and his hand was steady as he wrote, not an explanation, just a warning in letters that were nothing like his usual handwriting. "Old friend. Dangerous attention from those who wish you harm. Relocate again immediately. Do not respond. Do not acknowledge receipt. Burn this." He sealed the note carefully, folding it small enough to fit inside a message tube. Then he left it on the table where Narcissa would see it, and he didn't look at her as he did it. He couldn't look at her. He was afraid of what he might see in her face. Narcissa watched him with an expression he could not read, something between gratitude and disdain, between hope and despair. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. "You should have walked out," she said. "You should have gone back to your castle and forgotten about this." "Yes," Harry agreed. "I should have, but I didn't." Iris came downstairs in her nightclothes about 20 minutes later, rubbing her eyes with the heels of her hands. Her hair was mussed from sleep, and her small feet were bare on the stone floor. "Why is Harry here?" she asked sleepily. "It's late. You said I had to sleep." "Because I needed to see him," Narcissa said, and her voice had changed, had softened into something almost gentle, almost warm. It was a voice Harry had never heard her use before. "Come here, Iris." Iris walked to her without hesitation, moving with the absolute trust of a child who had no other option, no other choice. Narcissa lifted her easily into her lap. The child curled against her shoulder, her small hand coming to rest on Narcissa's collarbone, her head tucked under Narcissa's chin. They sat in the firelight like a portrait painted by someone who understood sorrow better than most people ever could. Harry watched this image fix itself in his mind with a clarity that felt almost painful. Narcissa Malfoy, the wife of a Death Eater, the sister-in-law of a madwoman, held in the small weight of an orphaned Muggle-born child. Both of them lit by a fire that cast dancing shadows across the cellar walls, making everything seem less real, more like a dream or a memory of something that had never quite happened. This was what he was defending, he understood with sudden certainty. Not Narcissa alone, with all her choices and her sins and her complicity in death. Not Iris alone, though she mattered desperately. But this, the moment between them, the connection, the evidence that even in the darkest circumstances, love could still exist. That a woman who made calculations about who would die could also love a child enough to hide her, to risk everything to keep her safe. That the world was more complicated than simply good and evil. He watched the way Iris's breathing was evening out as she relaxed completely, the way her small body went limp against Narcissa's chest. He watched the way Narcissa's rigid spine seemed to settle, the way her hand came up to rest against Iris's back, holding her gently. It was such a small gesture, and it was everything. He would defend this if he had to. He would lie to every Auror in Britain if he had to. He would walk away from Dumbledore and Hermione and Ron and everyone he had ever cared about. He would burn the world if he had to, because this small moment of a woman and a child finding comfort in each other, was worth more than anything else he could think of. The realization was terrifying and absolute. He left long before dawn, climbing back through the passage to the castle with the weight of everything he had learned, everything he had witnessed, pressing down on his shoulders. The castle corridors were empty, the towers sleeping, the painted portraits all closed away in their dreams. He had almost reached the tower stairs when he heard footsteps echoing on the stone, and his heart hammered in his chest. He ducked behind a suit of armor, pulling his invisibility cloak around himself, holding his breath. But the figure that passed was Hermione. She was fully dressed despite the hour, her bushy hair tied back in a practical braid, her expression vaguely irritated in a way that was very characteristic of her. She paused as she passed the suit of armor, stopped walking, then turned around with an expression of exasperation that was almost amusing if Harry hadn't been so exhausted. "You're there, aren't you?" she said, speaking to empty air. "I can tell by the way the air moved when you dodged. You displaced the fabric of your cloak. It's quite obvious if you know what you're looking for." Harry pulled off his invisibility cloak and stepped out from behind the armor, wondering how many times his supposed invisibility had actually been invisible to anyone at all. "Don't say anything," Hermione said immediately, before he could speak. "Not now, not here. I'm trusting you, so don't waste my trust by lying or making excuses." She held out a small flask, still warm to the touch. "You look absolutely terrible. This is pepper-up potion. I brewed it myself last year and I've been keeping a stock for emergencies. Drink it." Harry took the flask. It smelled strongly of herbs and something vaguely spicy. "Do better," Hermione continued, and there was steel in her voice. "Whatever you're doing, you need to be more careful. Snape is watching you. I saw him watching you at breakfast, and that's never a good sign. And McGonagall asked me about your whereabouts yesterday. She didn't ask Ron, just me. She knows something's wrong. If you're going to do this, you have to be better at hiding it." "I know," Harry said. "Do you?" Hermione asked pointedly. "Because from where I'm standing, you're doing everything badly. You smell like old stone and candle wax. Your robes are singed on the left side, did you know that? Your eyes are red-rimmed. You're clearly not sleeping, and you're clearly under significant stress. You're not being careful, Harry. You're being obvious." "I'll do better," Harry promised. Hermione studied his face for a long moment, as though she was trying to read something in his expression. Then she nodded. "See that you do. And if you get yourself killed, if you do something stupid and get yourself killed, I will resurrect you specifically to kill you again. I'm not joking. I've already looked up the resurrection spell, and I'm perfectly willing to use it if necessary." "I'm not planning on dying," Harry said quietly. "None of us are," Hermione replied. "That doesn't seem to stop us. People die in wars all the time, Harry. People with better plans than we have. People who thought they were going to survive. So be careful." She turned and walked back toward the tower, her footsteps echoing on the stone. And Harry understood, watching her go, that this was as close as Hermione Granger could come to saying, "I trust you." This was her way of offering support without demanding explanation. This was her saying that she knew he was in trouble and that she was choosing to help him anyway. He drank the potion slowly, feeling warmth seep back into his chest and fingers. The pepper-up worked quickly. His fatigue receded somewhat, though it didn't disappear entirely. He made his way to the dormitory as the first gray light crept across the horizon, painting the windows in shades of pale silver and blue. By the time he reached the tower, most of the students were still sleeping, and he managed to slip into his four-poster without waking anyone. In the morning, after breakfast, McGonagall found him in the corridor outside Transfiguration. She stepped out of the classroom just as he was passing, as though she had been waiting for him specifically. "Potter," she said, her voice carefully neutral in a way that made his stomach drop and his mouth go dry. "Professor Dumbledore would like to see you this evening. His office, after dinner, come by around 8 o'clock. Harry's blood went cold. His hands involuntarily clenched into fists. "Yes, Professor," he managed to say, his voice not quite steady. "Is there something wrong?" McGonagall studied him for a long moment, and her expression was unreadable. "That is what the headmaster would like to discuss with you. I would suggest that you arrive on time." She walked away, her robes swishing around her feet, and Harry watched her go with a sense of dread that was rapidly approaching panic. What did Dumbledore want? Had he found out about Iris? Had he found out about the cabinet? Had someone reported seeing Harry leaving the castle at night? Had Snape managed to extract information from his broken shields? Harry spent the entire day in a state of anxious anticipation. He could barely focus in lessons. In defense against the dark arts, Snape seemed to watch him with renewed interest, as though trying to determine what had changed since yesterday. In potions, Harry managed to poison his own cauldron 3 times, something he usually only managed once or twice per lesson. By the time dinner arrived, his nerves were shredded, and he had convinced himself of a dozen different catastrophes. He went to the Great Hall despite his anxiety, sat at the Gryffindor table, and forced himself to eat despite having no appetite. Hermione watched him with sharp eyes, but she didn't ask questions. Ron was too engrossed with Lavender to notice anything was amiss. At exactly 8 o'clock, Harry left the table and made his way to Dumbledore's office. His legs felt unsteady, as though they didn't quite belong to him. He climbed the moving staircases, navigated the corridors, and arrived at the stone gargoyle entrance. For a moment, he stood there staring at it, unable to bring himself to move. Then he took a breath and spoke the password he had been given years ago. "Lemon drop." The gargoyle jumped aside, and the staircase spiraled upward, carrying him toward whatever waited in Dumbledore's office. Harry's heart hammered in his chest with a rhythm that felt dangerously fast. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. What sisters do the silver instruments on Dumbledore's shelves caught the winter light as they turned in their endless mechanical routines. Harry sat in the familiar leather chair across from the desk, watching a tiny orrery spin itself into slower and slower loops, as if the mechanical planets were growing tired of their orbit. He had been summoned here after breakfast, and he had spent the walk from the common room rehearsing what he might say, or rather, what he would not say. Dumbledore stood at the window, his long fingers steepled together, his gaze fixed on the snow-covered grounds below. He did not turn immediately when Harry entered, which had given Harry a moment to collect himself, to arrange his face into something approaching normalcy. Now Dumbledore moved to the cabinet where he kept his collection of memories, those small glass vials of experience, crystallized and waiting, and withdrew one. The silver liquid inside caught the light as he held it up to the window. "I thought," Dumbledore said, his voice soft with that particular gentleness that made Harry's chest tighten, "that it might be useful for you to see another moment from Tom Riddle's past. This one dates from his 5th year at Hogwarts. A small thing, perhaps a choice, but choices shape us far more profoundly than we often admit." Harry rose and walked to the pensive, which sat on its carved wooden stand like a basin waiting to be filled. The memory hung between them, Dumbledore's thumb resting on the vial's stopper. "Put on your robes," Dumbledore said. "It is quite cold in this memory." Harry had done this before, entered the pensive, stepped into someone else's past, seen the world through the eyes of memory. But his mind was not on Tom Riddle this morning. It was elsewhere, moving through snow-covered streets, flickering between two faces, Narcissa's, drawn with panic, and Iris's, small and brave and 8 years old. He was thinking about a black ribbon, folded into thirds, left in the agreed place 3 days ago. He was thinking about the note's single word. Come. He was thinking about Dumbledore noticing. The pensive pulled him down, and for 20 minutes he stood in a Hogwarts corridor from 1945, watching a younger version of Tom Riddle convince a girl named Cecilia to steal a test paper for him. It was a masterpiece of manipulation, Riddle's voice never rising, his smile never wavering, the girl's own desire to please metamorphosing into betrayal of her friends. Harry watched it as one might watch a play in a language one did not fully understand, the words going in and out of his ears without sticking. He saw Riddle's face, younger, but containing all the same coldness, all the same certainty that he was right and everyone else was merely material to be shaped. He saw the moment the girl understood what she had done, what she had become in Riddle's hands. And he thought about Bellatrix and how Voldemort's gift for manipulation seemed to run in his favored servants like a bloodline of its own. When he climbed out of the pensive, Dumbledore was watching him with an expression that made Harry's stomach clench. "You are distracted," Dumbledore said. It was not a question. "No, sir," Harry said, too quickly. "It was just the memory was unsettling." "It was meant to be." Dumbledore's blue eyes, magnified slightly behind his half-moon spectacles, studied Harry's face with terrible clarity. "I was pointing out that Tom Riddle's gift lay not in magic, but in understanding what others wanted and weaponizing that knowledge. A skill I have watched him refine over decades. A skill, I might add, that seems to be affecting you rather strongly at present." Harry's mouth went dry. "Are you sleeping, Harry?" Dumbledore asked. "Yes, sir." "Are you sleeping well?" Harry could have lied again, but there seemed to be no point. "No, sir." "I thought not." Dumbledore rose and moved to the cabinet where he kept his most prized possessions. He withdrew a small crystal glass and poured something from a decanter, an amber liquid that caught the light like condensed sunlight. He did not offer any to Harry, which somehow made the gesture more powerful. This was Dumbledore's own glass, his own ritual. You are thinking about things that have no easy answers. You are weighing costs in your mind, the cost of action, the cost of inaction, the cost of secrets. These are the thinking patterns of someone carrying something very heavy indeed. He did not drink the liquid. He simply held it, watching the light pass through it. "Are you keeping the company of friends?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with implication. Harry thought of Hermione's face when she had agreed to let him have his secret. He thought of Ron, who did not know anything was amiss. He thought of Narcissa Malfoy, who was most certainly not his friend, and yet whom he was now inexplicably, irrationally beginning to trust. He thought of Iris, 8 years old and already bearing the weight of more knowledge than any child should carry. He thought of the careful arrangement of secrets and silence that had become his life. "Yes," Harry said. "Ron and Hermione, mainly." Dumbledore inclined his head as if this was exactly what he expected Harry to say, which perhaps it was. Dumbledore inclined his head. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, "You look as though you are carrying something very heavy, Harry, something that weighs on your shoulders and keeps you from sleep." He paused. His hand rose, slightly, in a gesture that seemed almost to reach across the desk between them, and then fell again. "If there should ever come a moment when you must act and cannot ask me, Harry, act. Do not wait for permission you cannot receive. Do not paralyze yourself with guilt for choices you have not had time to explain. Sometimes, the right thing and the forbidden thing wear the same face." Harry felt something crack open inside his chest. Sir, I don't." "You do not need to answer," Dumbledore said gently. "I am simply telling you that I know you, Harry Potter. I know the shape of your conscience, and I know that if you are keeping a secret from me, it is because you believe it to be necessary. That will have to be enough." Harry left the office in a state of suspended panic, neither knowing whether Dumbledore had guessed something specific or had simply read his face well enough to sense deception. The possibility that it was both made his legs feel uncertain beneath him. 2 days passed in a blur of lessons and Quidditch practice, and the carefully maintained fiction of normalcy. He ate in the Great Hall. He sat through Transfiguration and potions. He did not let his eyes linger on Draco Malfoy, who had been subdued since Christmas, his face drawn in a way that spoke of sleeplessness and fear. Harry understood now what that fear was, at least in part. Draco had a task his father had given him, one that Dumbledore knew about, that had something to do with the vanishing cabinets Harry had discovered in Room of Requirement, and it was grinding him down day by day, choice by choice. On the evening of the second day, Harry was returning from the library when he saw it. A small scrap of black ribbon, folded precisely into thirds, left in the hollow of the statue of Godric Gryffindor that stood in the corridor near the Charms classroom. A signal, danger. Come at once! His heart hammered in his chest. He waited until nearly midnight, then wrapped himself in the invisibility cloak and slipped from the common room. The castle was mostly asleep. The corridors echoed with his silent footsteps. He moved through the lower levels and out into the courtyard, where snow lay thick and pale under a moonless sky. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. The walk to Hogsmeade took 20 minutes under the cloak, and every second of it was agony. He was fully alert to every sound, every movement in the snow-covered darkness. The feeling that someone was following him never quite went away, though when he looked back, there was nothing but undisturbed snow and shadows. The safe house was on the north side of town, an old cottage that Narcissa had somehow acquired under a false name. It sat apart from the other buildings, surrounded by thick hedges and snow. Harry checked the wards she had taught him, a small charm, requiring only a whisper and a touch to a specific stone in the wall, and then let himself inside. Narcissa was pacing. She had drawn the curtains tightly closed, and a single candle burned on the mantelpiece. She wore a dark green robe that made her pale skin look almost translucent. Her blonde hair was coming loose from its pins. When she saw Harry, she did not embrace him or greet him. Instead, she simply said, "Bellatrix is coming to the manor tonight. She has sent word that she is bringing a present for her sister. She will arrive around midnight, perhaps later." Harry's chest went very still. "What kind of present?" he asked, though he already knew. "The kind that tests my loyalties," Narcissa said flatly. "Bellatrix has been watching me." "Do you understand what I mean by that? Not metaphorically, literally watching. She has asked me questions about where I go, what I do, who I correspond with. Last month she suggested that my views on the war seemed to be softening. 2 weeks ago, she brought me a Muggle-born prisoner and watched to see how I reacted. I performed properly, of course. I was disgusted, contemptuous, but I could feel her eyes on me like a hand pressing against my spine." She stopped pacing and turned to face Harry. "Tonight is the final test. She will bring a captured Muggle-born child, and she will expect me to kill it." Harry felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. "Not just to perform the killing," Narcissa continued, her voice taking on a knife-like edge. "Actually kill it. Bellatrix is many things, Harry, but she is not stupid. She has been studying the use of glamours and deceptions for as long as I have known her. She will know the difference between a real death and a trick. The child's body must be actually dead, or she will know I have betrayed her, and she will know that Voldemort cannot be allowed to find out." "We will not do it," Harry said flatly. "We will not," Narcissa agreed. "But we must make her believe we have." From the top of the cellar stairs came a small sound, a shuffle of feet. Iris appeared a moment later, descending carefully, her small frame wrapped in a sweater that was too large for her. Her face was pale but composed. Narcissa saw her and said quietly, "Go back downstairs, Iris. We need to talk about what comes after." Iris hesitated, and for a moment Harry saw her calculate, the 8-year-old intelligence weighing options, and then she turned and climbed back down. The cellar door closed with a soft click. "There is a charm," Narcissa said when they were alone again. "A very old one. From before the ministry began regulating such things. It places the subject into a death-like sleep, deep enough that even trained Aurors have been fooled, deep enough that the heart barely beats. The Beadle the Bard tales reference it, though they gloss over the darkest applications. It requires a real subject and the caster's hand. A potion alone will not do. A charm will not do. The magic must be woven directly into flesh, must conform to a living body's particular resonance. Harry began to understand. You want to use it on someone to convince Bellatrix that a death has occurred. We cannot use a doll or a wax figure, Narcissa said. Bellatrix has a gift for sensing such things. Magic bent to specific purposes sets off something in her perception. She will know within seconds if the child is not real, and she will also know that I have known it. So what are you proposing? Harry asked, though a terrible suspicion was already forming. The simplest solution, Narcissa said. The only one that will work within the time we have. Iris is the captive. Bellatrix presents her. I perform the death sleep, dressed as the killing curse. You, hidden and waiting, perform the counterspell at the exact instant Bellatrix is satisfied. Bellatrix believes the child dead. Iris wakes and is quietly removed before the morning. Harry stared at her. You are asking me to let your sister watch your daughter sleep while you pretend to kill her. I am asking you to help me save her life, Narcissa said, and her voice shook for the first time. And the lives of any other children Bellatrix might bring to my doorstep while she continues to test my loyalty. This is the only way that does not require a real death. Harry felt sick. No, he said. We find another way. We find a Muggle child from an orphanage, someone who can be returned after. There is no time, Narcissa said flatly. Bellatrix arrives tonight. We have perhaps 8 hours. And an orphanage child is unknown, potentially traceable. Voldemort has agents everywhere, Harry. If a child goes missing after Bellatrix presents a gift, there will be questions. They argued for another 10 minutes, circling the same terrible logic, finding no way out of it. Harry proposed alternatives frantically: find a willing volunteer, use an illusion charm, stage an escape so complete that Bellatrix could not follow. And Narcissa, patient and relentless, explained why each option would fail. A volunteer would have to be hidden somewhere, and Bellatrix knew the locations of every Saffy house Voldemort had marked. An illusion would be discovered within seconds. Bellatrix had been trained by Voldemort himself in the arts of seeing through deception. An escape staged so completely would require Harry's hand to be revealed, which would destroy everything they were trying to build. There is another option, Narcissa said quietly, after Harry had fallen silent. I could refuse. I could tell Bellatrix that I will not do it, that I have grown too soft for such work. It would confirm all her suspicions about my loyalty, but it would stop her from bringing more children. She would kill you, Harry said flatly. Or worse. Yes, Narcissa agreed. Probably. Finally, exhausted, Harry said, What does Iris say? Narcissa descended the cellar stairs and returned a few minutes later with the child in tow. Iris did not look frightened, which somehow made it worse. She sat down on the edge of a chair and regarded Harry with eyes that seemed far too old for her face. Narcissa explained it to her in terms that were gentle but absolutely clear. She would be brought upstairs as a prisoner. She would be placed into a magical sleep that would look like death. She would be watched by Narcissa and a woman named Bellatrix. She must not move, must not twitch, must not show any sign of consciousness. And then someone would wake her and it would be over. Will it hurt? Iris asked. No, Narcissa said. Will I remember it? You might have dreams, dark ones perhaps, but they will not be real. Iris was silent for a long moment, her small hands folded in her lap. Then she said, Will it save the other children? Harry felt something shift in his chest. It might, Narcissa said. If Bellatrix believes I have remained loyal, she will not come looking for hidden girls, and she will not bring more captives to test me with. Iris nodded slowly, processing this. How long will I sleep? Minutes, Narcissa said. Perhaps a quarter of an hour. The counterspell will bring you back. You will wake in a safe place. Will you be there? Iris asked. I will, Narcissa said, and something in her voice, some thread of absolute conviction, seemed to settle the matter for the child. Iris turned to Harry. You'll do the counterspell. You'll make sure I wake up. Harry wanted to lie to her, wanted to promise absolute safety, wanted to tell her that nothing could possibly go wrong. Instead, he said, I will do everything in my power to wake you. I promise you that." It was the most honest thing he could offer. Iris was quiet for another moment. Then she said, with a calm that terrified them both, "Then I will do it." They spent the next hours preparing with methodical precision, as though they were discussing a transfiguration assignment rather than a plan that could end with a child's actual death if anything went wrong. Narcissa taught Harry the counterspell. It was easier than the death sleep, just a reversal, a gentle pulling back from that deep well of unconsciousness. She made him practice it a dozen times on a small crystal, watching as he pulled the magic back, refined it, made it exact. "The moment of reversal is everything," she told him. "Too slow and the sleep deepens. Too fast and you might jar her consciousness too violently. Smooth, it must be smooth and precise." "What if I'm not fast enough?" Harry asked. "Then Bellatrix will see the child still living when she expected to see a corpse," Narcissa said flatly. "And she will kill us both, so you must be fast enough." She explained the exact moment he would need to cast it, the instant Bellatrix smiled, the instant her attention shifted away from the child. Not a second before, or Bellatrix might notice the lightening of the spell. Bellatrix's gift for perceiving deception was almost supernatural. She could sense when magic was being pulled back, when truth was being bent. Not a second after, or the sleep might deepen into something more dangerous, something that might not have a reversible point. They dressed Iris in ragged muggle clothes and mussed her hair. Narcissa gave her a small charm to swallow that would keep her throat raw, to make her look as though she had been crying or screaming. To sell the deception, Narcissa explained softly. The child swallowed it without complaint, and Harry saw her run her tongue over her teeth as if tasting the bitterness. "How do I act?" Iris asked. "When she brings me in. Like you are terrified," Narcissa said. "Like you do not know what will happen to you. Like you are trying very hard not to show your fear and failing. Can you do that?" Iris nodded. And then, as if to demonstrate, she let her eyes widen, let her breathing quicken. For a moment, she looked exactly as a captured, terrorized child should look. Harry had to remind himself that she was acting, that the fear in her eyes was performance, because it was so absolutely convincing. Then she stepped back out of character, and she was just Iris again, small and grave and impossibly brave. As the winter sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long shadows through the cottage's single window, Narcissa and Iris prepared to apparate to Malfoy Manor. Narcissa performed a final check of her appearance, her robes pristine, her hair perfectly arranged, every inch of her the portrait of a pureblood noblewoman about to entertain her sister. Iris was dressed in the ragged clothes. Harry checked the positioning of his cloak, made certain it would render him completely invisible. "If anything goes wrong," Harry said to Narcissa, "if Bellatrix suspects even for a moment, then we are all dead," Narcissa said. "And Iris is dead with us. So nothing will go wrong." She said it with absolute certainty, and Harry had to believe her, because the alternative was to give in to the paralyzing fear that had been trying to overwhelm him for the last hour. Harry, under his invisibility cloak, disapparated beside them. The manor was enormous and cold, all dark stone and narrow windows. It lay under a layer of fresh snow, looking almost peaceful, which made its true nature all the more grotesque. Harry had been inside it once before, during his 5th year, and the memory of it sat uneasily in his mind. Now he crouched in a corridor on the ground floor, cloaked and nearly invisible, and tried not to think about the snake he could hear sliding across the floor above him. His scar burned whenever he thought too hard about Voldemort's presence elsewhere, being channeled through the manor's very walls. He could feel it like a pressure behind his eyes, like something vast and terrible pressing against the edges of his consciousness, held back only by distance and the thinness of walls. The manor's interior had not changed since his last visit. The same dark tapestries hung on the walls. The same portraits of long-dead Malfoys stared down with expressions of contempt. The same smell of old magic and colder blood seemed to permeate the very stone. Harry pressed himself into the shadow of a suit of armor and tried to control his breathing. Lucius was at the ministry. Draco was at Hogwarts. The servants were clearing away snow from the front steps, moving with the peculiar mechanical precision of those who lived in fear. And then, at 20 minutes past midnight, Bellatrix arrived. She swept into the drawing room like a winter wind, laughing, and the sound of it, bright and cheerful and absolutely unhinged, made Harry's blood run cold. She was carrying something small and struggling, which she set down on the carpet with the casual cruelty of someone handling a bag of refuse. It was a child, a girl, no more than 10 years old, with dark hair and darker eyes wide with terror. A gag made of what looked like Bellatrix's own scarf was bound around her mouth. Her arms were bound behind her back with rope that looked almost decorative against her thin wrists. "Sissy!" Bellatrix called out, her voice dripping with affection and menace in equal measure. "Come see what I have brought you. A little gift from the countryside. A lovely muggle-born, barely old enough to be interesting, but that is rather the point, is it not? They are always more afraid when they are young." Narcissa appeared in the doorway, and Harry held his breath. He could see her face, the way her eyes went to the child on the floor, the way her mask tried to slip and then locked back into place. Beautiful, imperious, inhuman. "Bellatrix," she said, and her voice was perfectly modulated, perfectly cold. "What a thoughtful gesture. Is this a test of my loyalty, then? Have you doubts about where my sympathies lie?" Bellatrix laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Perhaps. You have seemed so distant lately, sister. So many questions about the children disappearing in London. So little enthusiasm for the work of the war. I thought you might need reminding of what we are fighting for, what we are willing to do." She circled the child like a predator, and the girl tried to press herself against the carpet to make herself smaller. Harry's hands clenched into fists. "Watch," Bellatrix said to Narcissa, her voice taking on a dangerous edge. "And tell me truly, are you with us or against us?" Narcissa was very still. Harry saw her make a calculation. She had already told him she could not fake a death. Bellatrix would know. And yet, some other option was crystallizing in her expression, something sharper and more dangerous than the plan they had made. When she spoke, her voice was different. Colder, more deliberately cruel. "Bellatrix, I am wounded that you think me so squeamish," she said, and her voice took on a purring quality that Harry had never heard from her before, the voice of a woman who had learned to navigate circles of cruelty and had become expert at its rhythms. "But this is hardly the proper venue for such work. Too exposed. The blood will be difficult to explain to the house elves. And more, I do not perform under scrutiny. You know how I am." Bellatrix's smile faltered slightly, and for one terrible moment, Harry thought the deception had failed, that Bellatrix would see through it. But then Narcissa continued, her voice taking on a note of shared conspiracy, as if she were welcoming her sister deeper into a secret. "I have had my own captive in mind for some weeks now," Narcissa said. She spoke as if she were admitting to something dark and wonderful, something that Bellatrix would appreciate. "A much more interesting specimen, a girl with rather a gift for magic despite her origins. She has been quite difficult to break, actually, rather spirit-filled. It made the work more engaging. She has been waiting for the right moment. I propose a refinement to your test that we perform them together, both of them, for the sport of it." And Harry, watching from his hiding place, understood what Narcissa was doing. She was not just averting suspicion, she was playing into Bellatrix's deepest desires. She was making her sister feel that they were allied, that they understood each other, that they shared the same appreciation for cruelty. She was flattering Bellatrix by suggesting that her gift was so special that it deserved a better audience, a more refined experience. Bellatrix's smile bloomed across her face like a flower opening to poison light. Her eyes brightened. This was everything she wanted to hear. "Oh, Sissy, you have been keeping secrets. How delightful." She rose from her chair, and her hand reached out to touch Narcissa's arm with unexpected affection, a gesture that would have been tender if it were not Bellatrix performing it. "I knew you had not softened. I knew my sister still had spine. How could I have doubted you?" She clapped her hands, genuinely pleased, like a child on Christmas morning. "Yes, yes, bring her out. Let me see this treasure you have been hiding. We will do them together, sister to sister. It will be glorious." While Bellatrix was ordering a house elf to bring wine, Narcissa's eyes flicked, just barely, to the corridor where Harry hid. He understood. He pulled his cloak tighter around himself and slipped away from his hiding place, moving up the back stairs as silently as he could move. The house elf found him on the second landing. It did not have time to cry out. Harry's stunning spell caught it square in the face, and it crumpled like a dropped handkerchief. He felt a flash of guilt, but it was quickly overridden by necessity. He took the house elf's form, a loose gray tunic, nothing else that identified it, and carried the unconscious creature into a nearby linen closet, where he bound it gently with a spell and left it to sleep. When he returned to the drawing room, he was just another servant, unremarkable and invisible. Bellatrix did not even look at him as he poured wine into crystal glasses. Narcissa had prepared the glasses in advance. In one of them, the wine was tinged with a colorless, nearly odorless potion that she had told him she had been keeping for 2 years. It was a slow soporific, something that would dull reflexes without causing obvious intoxication. 1 glass would be enough for a quarter of an hour. Bellatrix drank. Then Narcissa excused herself and disappeared into the corridor. Harry waited, his breath held, barely daring to move. The captive child on the floor had stopped struggling. She had gone very still, which was somehow more terrible than her earlier panic. When Narcissa returned, she was not alone. Iris emerged from the corridor behind her, and Harry felt his heart twist. The girl looked like a stranger, or rather, she looked like a prisoner. Her small face was streaked with tears. Her eyes were wide and terrible. She wore the same ragged Muggle clothes they had dressed her in, and the charm Narcissa had given her made her look as though she had been screaming. But her chin was high. And when she caught Harry's eye for just a fraction of a second, he saw something in her that was not fear, but will. "Here," Narcissa said to Bellatrix, gesturing to Iris with casual disgust. "This is my own captive. She has been proving quite useful, but I have grown bored with her. Shall we end her together?" Bellatrix rose slightly from her chair, her eyes glittering. "Oh, this is a beautiful gift," she whispered. "Much better than my own pathetic offering. Let me see you do it, sissy. Show me that your heart is still true." Narcissa stepped back. She raised her wand. And in that terrible, clear moment, she cast the death sleep, exactly as she had described it, the wand movement exactly that of the killing curse, the incantation silent and invisible to anyone who did not know what to look for. Iris's face went slack. Her body went rigid, and then entirely limp. She fell like a puppet with cut strings, and her small body struck the carpet with a sound that made Harry's stomach turn to ice. For one frozen moment, she looked absolutely dead. Bellatrix laughed, a sound of pure delight, and she applauded, clapping her hands together like a child. "Oh, sissy, you have grown a spine. I am so pleased, so very, very pleased. Look at how she fell, so sudden, so complete. You have learned well from our time together, sister. I am proud of you." Narcissa's face was perfect, pleased, relieved, empty of any care. Only someone who knew her very well would have seen the slight tremor in her hand as she lowered her wand. "She was becoming tedious," Narcissa said, "rather tiring to keep hidden. I am grateful for your demonstration, truly. It showed me that perhaps my tolerance for the work had returned." "You will need to return to it," Bellatrix said, reaching out to touch Iris's small hand with one finger. The child's hand was cold, lifeless. Bellatrix smiled. "There will be so much work to do when the Dark Lord has finished with his current projects. He has plans, sissy, magnificent, terrible plans, and you will have an important role in them. He has grown so fond of us, you know, of our family. He trusts us in ways he does not trust the others." Harry moved. He did not let himself hesitate. If he thought about it, if he gave himself one moment to consider the possibility of failure, he would freeze. He cast the stunning spell with all the force he could muster, all his rage and horror and fear channeled into one bolt of red light. It caught Bellatrix square in the back, and she was moving. She had the reflexes of someone who had lived in danger her entire life, but not quite fast enough. The spell caught her and knocked her sideways into the table. She crashed into it with a sound like thunder, and her body went limp. Her wand flew from her hand and skidded across the floor, spinning until it came to rest near the fireplace, utterly out of reach. For one frozen second, there was absolute silence. Then Harry grabbed the captive child with one arm. She was light, so light, small-boned as a bird, and he shouted at Narcissa, "Revive her! Now, the safe house!" He turned his back to them and disapparated from the interior of the manor, something that should have been impossible, should have required the wards to be lowered. But Narcissa had done that when she fetched her gift, had lowered a layer of the protective spells just enough for a planned exit. Harry held the captive child tight and spun sideways, pulling himself through the fissure in the wards. He had 6 seconds before they locked back into place. He made it with 1 second to spare. The safe house was exactly as they had left it. Harry emerged in the small front room and immediately set the child down on the worn sofa, checking her for injuries. She was conscious but deeply in shock, her eyes unfocused, her breathing shallow. Her small frame was trembling uncontrollably. She did not respond when Harry spoke to her, but she did not resist when he helped her to lie down and fetched a blanket. He wrapped her gently, careful not to touch her in ways that might startle her further. Her name, he realized, they had never asked. "What's your name?" he asked softly, checking her for injuries. She stared at him with eyes that looked far too old for her face. "Anya," she whispered. "My name is Anya." 2 minutes later, Narcissa apparated into the room with Iris cradled in her arms. The child was limp and pale, her skin clammy, her breathing almost imperceptible, slower than a sleeping child's, slower than was comfortable to observe. For one horrible moment that stretched into eternity, Harry thought the counterspell had not worked, that something had gone terribly wrong. He thought about Bellatrix waking, about the moment when she would realize what had happened, about the narrow margin by which he had escaped her. He thought about whether the counterspell had failed, whether Iris might remain in that deep well of sleep forever, locked in a place from which no magic could retrieve her. But then Narcissa was laying her down gently on the sofa beside the other girl, and she was checking her pulse with the precision of someone who had been trained in healing, her fingers steady despite everything. She was checking her breathing, pressing her ear close to Iris's lips. And she was saying, with a voice that broke slightly on the last word, "She is alive! She is alive!" The counterspell worked. Iris's eyes moved under her closed lids. A small sound escaped her throat, not quite a word, not quite a whimper. Her fingers twitched. Narcissa sat down on the edge of the sofa and gathered both children into her lap, holding them as though she could shield them from the entire world by sheer force of will. She pulled Iris close against her chest, her hand cradling the back of the child's head. One child was slowly waking, her small body gradually remembering how to breathe. The other, Anya, was staring at them with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. Without speaking, without any discussion or arrangement, the two girls found each other's hands. Iris's fingers, still limp from sleep, curled around Anya's grip. Two children who had been used as weapons, as tests, as proof of loyalty, holding onto each other in the darkness. Harry moved about the small room, doing what needed doing. He brought water from the cottage's ancient well. He fetched blankets from the linen closet and layered them over both children. He prepared tea, not magical, just ordinary hot water with chamomile and honey, though he was not sure they would drink it. He did not look at Narcissa's face, because he could not bear what he would see there. An adult carrying a child she had been forced to place into a death-like sleep. An adult who had cast a dark spell and meant every word of it, had cast it perfectly, convincingly, as though she truly meant to end the child's life, and then been forced to trust a 16-year-old in an invisibility cloak to wake that child in time. The weight of what they had done, what they had been forced to do, settled over the room like snow. When both girls were as comfortable as they could be, Harry moved to the window and watched the empty street. Snow was beginning to fall again, large soft flakes that covered the world in white, erasing footprints and tracks, making everything look clean and new. He found the contrast obscene. They had minutes, perhaps an hour, before Bellatrix woke. And when she did, when the stunning spell began to wear off and consciousness returned in fragments, when her reflexes began to return to her, when she could think clearly again, she would realize what had happened. She would try to rise. She would find herself on the floor of the drawing room, alone, disarmed, her prize lost. She would come after them. There was no doubt of that. Bellatrix Lestrange was not merciful, and she was not patient, and she had been humiliated in her own family's home by a child. But she would have to lie about it. Harry understood that much. Bellatrix could not tell Voldemort that she had been stunned by a 16-year-old student, could not report that something had gone catastrophically wrong in her own family's drawing room, could not admit that she had been outwitted by a scheme involving a child and a house elf. She would fabricate a story. The spell had misfired, or the child had been too fragile and died too quickly, or the muggles who had sheltered her had come looking for her. She would come looking for Narcissa with the fury of the betrayed, but not immediately, not yet. At least not with Voldemort's full knowledge and blessing. At least not immediately. When both children seemed settled, Harry moved away from Narcissa's side. His hands were shaking. He pressed them against his thighs to steady them, but they would not stop shaking. The adrenaline was beginning to wear off, and in its place came the full realization of what could have happened, what had almost happened, what had been narrowly avoided only because of timing, and because Bellatrix's reflexes, while extraordinary, were not quite fast enough. He sent a silver stag bursting from his wand, a patronus that cost him more than it should have. The fear was too fresh. The memory of Bellatrix's laugh still too bright in his mind. The image of Iris's supposedly lifeless body still burned into his vision. But he directed it with careful precision, forcing the magic to cohere into words. 2 children, safe house, need extraction by morning. The stag bounded away from him, shimmering and beautiful and entirely wrong to use for such a dark purpose. It was meant to be a force of light and hope, and instead he had used it to coordinate the rescue of kidnapped children, the deception of a Death Eater, the stunning of a woman who terrified the wizarding world. Some part of Harry wondered if the patronus would even work for such purposes, if magic itself would refuse to participate in such compromise. But the stag was bright and clear and moving through the night, carrying his message to Lupin, and so magic, it seemed, was more flexible than he had believed. Narcissa watched him cast it, and for one bare second, her perfect control shattered. Her eyes went glassy with something that might have been tears or might have been shock. Her hand moved, as though she might reach out to him, might thank him or apologize or simply acknowledge that they had done something terrible and necessary together. And then the moment passed, and she looked away, and she went back to tending the children, her movements smooth and practiced again, her face a mask. An hour later, Iris woke fully. Her eyes opened slowly, as though she were returning from somewhere very far away. For a moment, she did not seem to understand where she was or why she was there. Then memory returned to her face, and she began to tremble. She said nothing, but she reached for Narcissa's hand with a grip that was almost desperate, her small fingers clutching at her mother's robes as if she were drowning. Narcissa held it like a lifeline, not just accepting the grip, but strengthening it, drawing Iris closer, murmuring things that Harry could not quite hear, but which seemed to be words of reassurance, of protection, of a mother's absolute promise that she would not lose her child again. And in Malfoy Manor, on the floor of a drawing room that had witnessed countless horrors and would witness countless more, Bellatrix Lestrange opened her eyes. She did not open them gradually, did not blink slowly back into consciousness as a normal person might. She opened them suddenly, all at once, as if consciousness itself were a door that had been slammed open. For a moment, she lay perfectly still on the carpet, staring up at the ornate ceiling of her sister's drawing room, and simply remained there, utterly still, processing what had happened to her. Her head ached with a deep, throbbing pain that made it difficult to think. Her back felt as though she had been hit by something massive and traveling at tremendous speed, like being struck by a bludger in Quidditch, one of those impacts that stole your breath and shattered your ribs and left you gasping for air for minutes afterward. She became aware gradually of the cold seeping into her back from the floor. She became aware of the taste of blood in her mouth. She became aware that something had gone terribly, catastrophically wrong. She rose carefully, her movements slow and deliberate. Every part of her that could move did so with the precision of someone who had been trained to identify weakness and exploit it, someone who had spent decades of her life in rooms where hesitation meant death. She took inventory of her body, ribs intact, breathing possible if shallow, vision clear, hearing intact. The stunning curse. She had been hit by a stunning curse, and it had been powerful, perfectly cast, with the weight of real killing intent behind it. Which meant that someone in the manor had wanted her stunned, had wanted her out of the way, had wanted her disarmed and helpless. She rose to her full height and looked around the drawing room. It was empty. The room was utterly empty. The wine glasses still sat on the table, one of them half full, as though the person who had been drinking from it had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. There was no body of the child Sissy had killed, no blood on the carpet, no evidence of what had just happened here at all, except for the absolute wrongness of the empty room. The child, the one Bellatrix had brought, was gone. The child Sissy had presented, the one Sissy had killed, the one Sissy had cast the death sleep on, that child was gone as well. Most importantly, Sissy was gone. Her sister had vanished from the manor along with both children, which meant either she had left willingly or she had been taken. And the spell that had struck Bellatrix had not been Sissy's wand. Sissy's magic had a particular signature to it, a feel that Bellatrix had known since they were children together. This spell had come from someone else, someone hiding, someone waiting. Bellatrix's hands clenched into fists. She ran her fingers over the place where her wand had been, expecting to find it, expecting that the creature who had disarmed her would have been fool enough to leave it. But there was nothing but empty air. Someone had taken it. Someone had taken her sister. Someone had stolen her moment of triumph, her opportunity to test Sissy's loyalty, her gift of reunion with her sister. She became very still. She closed her eyes and took a long, deep breath. The anger that wanted to rise in her, that raw animal rage that would have her apparating immediately after them, would have her tearing apart everyone who had done this, she forced it down, pushed it into a box, locked it away for later use. If she reported this to Voldemort, she would have to explain her own defeat. She would have to admit that she had been stunned by someone in her own family's home. She would have to explain the loss of 2 children, one of whom she had hand-selected as a test for her sister. She would have to explain Sissy's disappearance. And if Voldemort discovered that Bellatrix had been outwitted by her own family, by her own sister, the consequences would be far worse than anything a 16-year-old child could inflict upon her. She stood in the center of the drawing room, brushing the dust and plaster from her robes with mechanical precision. She took a moment to straighten them, to compose her appearance, to ensure that she looked exactly as she should look. To anyone who saw her now, she would appear perfectly calm, perfectly in control, perfectly herself. She said very softly to the empty room, "Sissy." It was not affectionate. It was not gentle or loving or sisterly. It was the sound a predator makes when it has been cut, when it has been outmaneuvered, when it has been forced to look at the one thing in the world it had trusted and realize that trust had been weaponized against it. It was the sound of a woman who had devoted her entire life to Voldemort, to cruelty, to power, and had discovered that in the one place she had believed herself safe, in her own family, she had been betrayed. She ran her tongue over her teeth, tasting the blood there more fully. She would find Sissy, and when she did, the reckoning would make what she had planned for this evening look like a tender gesture of sisterly affection. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The door at the top of the stairs, the safe house, was gray before dawn, the kind of gray that made the world seem half erased. Harry had not slept. He did not think Narcissa had either, though she had not moved from the chair by Iris's cot for 5 hours, her hand resting on the girl's small shoulder with the weight of a feather. The room was very quiet. It was the kind of quiet that existed only in the hours before the world decided whether to continue or to end. Through the small window, Harry could see the lane beyond, still shrouded in darkness, still belonging entirely to sleep and to secrets. He had checked the wards 3 times since Lupin left with Anya. The wards held. They would continue to hold until someone who mattered decided to break them, and by then it would be far too late. Iris slept the sleep of the exhausted and bewildered. Harry had given her a headache draught mixed into warm milk, not sleeping draught, something gentler, because the child had watched Anya taken away with a stillness that frightened him more than tears. She had stood very straight, her 7-year-old back rigid with the effort of not breaking, and she had asked 3 questions, each with the careful enunciation of a child learning to accept the unacceptable. Will she be safe? Yes. Will I see her again? We hope. Is this my fault? And then she had allowed Narcissa to dress her in clean clothes and carry her to bed without further argument. Narcissa had sung to her. Harry had heard it through the thin walls, the kind of lullaby that existed in the Black family, something in French with words about starlight and protection, and the ways that love could persist even when everything else was burning. Her voice was very soft and very controlled, as if she were singing to someone who could hear in the spaces between notes the things that could not be said aloud. The patroness message from Lupin had come an hour after midnight. Harry had been sitting on the kitchen table with his eyes closed when the silver stag formed in front of him, materializing out of the darkness like something pulled from a half-remembered dream. Lupin's voice came through it, tight and controlled, each word measured like something very precious and very fragile. I have her. Complete secrecy. You will hear nothing from me again until spring. Do not try to contact me. Do not send messages. Do not leave marks that lead to where she is. Act as if she never existed. This is how she stays alive. The stag had faded, and with it the last thread of certainty. Harry did not know where Anya was. He did not know if she would be safe. He knew only that if he did not know, then neither could Voldemort, and that was all the protection anyone could offer her now. He had sat alone in the kitchen for a long time after the patroness dissolved, thinking about the ways that love expressed itself in this war. It was not kind. It was not comforting. It was the art of letting go so completely that you might never be found. 20 minutes later, there was a soft sound at the back door like nothing at all, less than wind, less than settling wood. Harry's wand was in his hand before he thought, but Narcissa had already moved, her pale fingers on his arm, saying nothing. She did not need to. They both knew what that kind of silence meant. Severus Snape appeared in the kitchen like a conjuration, his black robes seeming to gather the low light and swallow it. He did not greet them. He stood very still in the doorway, his eyes moving from the cup of cold tea on the table to the second wand beside it to Iris, visible through the crack in the bedroom door, asleep in Narcissa's coat that lay across her cot like a blessing. 40 seconds passed. Harry counted them. His hand was still on his wand. Snape's wand remained in its sleeve, untouched and unthreatening, which somehow made it worse. "You imbecile," Snape said to Narcissa, and there was something almost like grief in his voice, the kind of thing one might hear at a funeral for someone who had been dead for years already. Not anger. That would have been easier. Snape sounded the way one might sound if watching someone choose to walk off a cliff while offering them tea. "You imbecile." Narcissa did not move. She did not flinch. She did not do anything but stand there, very straight, very still, waiting for the condemnation that was already written on her face. "Severus, I had no choice. The Dark Lord does not accept this word, choice," Snape continued, as if she had not spoken. "The Dark Lord does not tolerate failures. The Dark Lord does not tolerate daughters who play with mudblood children and pretend the world has not seen them playing." His thin lips curled. "He will see them, Narcissa. He sees everything eventually. You ought to have known better." His eyes moved to Harry then, and they were very cold and very knowing. "And you, Potter, you ought to have been ours from the beginning. Did you know that? That was the original plan years ago when you were nothing but a rumor and a threat. They wanted you. The Dark Lord wanted you. I wanted you. you would have been ours." It was not entirely an insult. Harry understood, in a strange and terrible way, that it might be the closest thing to a compliment Severus Snape had ever offered him, a statement of fact delivered with the tone of someone offering an obituary to a corpse. "In another world, you could have mattered to us. In another world, you could have been ours. In this world, you are a stumbling fool with a wand and a dangerous conscience." It was not entirely an insult. Harry understood in a strange and terrible way that it might be the closest thing to a compliment Severus Snape had ever offered him. "Get out of this house," Snape said, still looking at Harry. His voice was very quiet, which was somehow more frightening than if he had been shouting. "Both of you. The Dark Lord is at the manor by morning. He will want to know about the disturbance. He will come here by tomorrow night. He will want to know where the blood protection ends and the stupidity begins, and he will be very thorough in asking." "What will you tell him?" Harry asked. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, younger, more afraid than he wanted to admit. Snape's eyes were black mirrors, reflecting nothing back but darkness. "The truth, eventually, but not today, not if she is careful." He turned to Narcissa. His expression did not soften, but something shifted in it, some small movement that might have been recognition of a shared doom, or might have been contempt. "You were at the apothecary, from 6 o'clock until 7:30. I sent you for essence of wormhood and powdered moonstone, both of which I require urgently for a new draft I have been developing. You were there at the hour Bellatrix was. Interrupted. You saw nothing. You heard nothing. You were simply filling your master's requirements as a loyal servant does. Can you remember that convincingly?" "Yes," Narcissa whispered. She was very pale. Even her lips had gone nearly white. "It will not hold for a second questioning," Snape continued, moving toward the door. "The Dark Lord is not Bellatrix. He will see the seams in the lie if he looks closely enough, if he thinks to look, but it will hold for one questioning. One carefully constructed interrogation. After that, you are on your own, and no cover I offer will protect you." He paused at the threshold, his hand on the door frame. "You will need to be very careful, more careful than you have been. And you will need to make sure he believes you have learned something from your near execution." Harry wanted to ask what Snape meant by that, but Snape was already moving, silently, efficiently, the way he moved through Hogwarts corridors, disappearing into hallways and appearing elsewhere, a ghost in the spaces between things. "Severus, wait!" Narcissa started, but the door was already closing with barely a whisper of sound, and the safe house seemed to collapse around them as if it had been holding its breath the whole time Snape was present. The walls seemed to fall inward. The air grew thinner, the space that had felt like shelter, like a place where they might actually hide and save one child and breathe, transformed instantly into a room with an hourglass running down. They had hours now, perhaps a day. Then Voldemort would come, and everything would be balanced on the edge of a perfectly told lie. At Malfoy Manor, in a room hung with tapestries that had been woven before the Ministry existed, in the heart of the place where death had been redefined into art, Voldemort listened to Bellatrix's account of the evening's events with the calm courtesy of a listener at a performance he had already paid for. She stood before him with her dark hair falling down her back like a curtain, her eyes bright with the fever of her own certainty, and she told him everything. She described a test of Narcissa's loyalty, a necessary trial for a woman married to a Death Eater, a reminder of where blood must bend. She described a girl brought in, a Muggle-born, a child with power that needed to be measured. A trial of nerve, nothing more, the Dark Lord's will to be obeyed, and unforgivable as proof of devotion. She described the stunning curse that had struck her down in her own home, in her own moment of righteous power, and she did not describe the face she thought she saw, the name she thought she heard, the word, Harry, echoing in her mind like a lie she could not believe, because she could not be certain she had heard it at all. Perhaps she had been stunned already. Perhaps the impact had disoriented her. Perhaps she was remembering something that had never happened because her mind had broken under the weight of her own failure. Voldemort did not interrupt her. He simply listened, his pale fingers steepled before his face, His eyes, those terrible red eyes that had seen every betrayal and every truth, fixed on her with absolute attention. When she finished, he continued to look at her for a very long time. The red eyes did not blink. The red eyes did not move. The red eyes simply saw her entirely and completely in a way that nothing else in the world could be seen. "Your sister," he said at last, his voice very soft and very clear, "has always been the cleverer of you, Bellatrix. It is a tragedy that she was born second. It is a tragedy that you have always known you could not match her wit." He paused. His smile was beautiful and terrible. "Bring her to me at noon tomorrow. I should like to have a conversation with her." He smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had already decided what he would find when he looked inside another person's mind. Bellatrix left the room more frightened than she had entered it. She left with her hands shaking and her certainty crumbling like ash. She left knowing that the Dark Lord was not interested in her explanation, in her version of truth. He was interested in Narcissa. He was interested in what Narcissa might have done, what Narcissa might have known, what Narcissa might have hidden. And Bellatrix, who loved the Dark Lord more than she loved her own reflection, understood for the first time that her sister might be more precious to him than she was, that her sister's cleverness might matter more than her devotion, that in the terrible mathematics of power, she had never been anything but a blunt instrument, while Narcissa had always been a knife with an edge. "We move Iris at dawn," Lupin said when he came back, not Lupin, but Tonks in Lupin's clothes, her hair a subdued brown, her expression grave in a way Harry had not seen on her face in years. "Completely off the map. The Order decides together once where she goes. Then the knowledge is sealed. Not even Dumbledore will know." "Why?" Harry asked, though he understood. "Because if one mind knows, the Dark Lord can break that mind," Tonks said quietly. She glanced at Narcissa. "No offense to present company." Narcissa did not flinch. "None taken. It is the wisest decision." Iris woke as the sky was beginning to lighten, the way children do when they sense something changing in the world around them, some shift in air pressure, some signal that the darkness is being withdrawn. She did not cry out. There had been enough crying. She sat up in the cot and looked for Narcissa, and Narcissa was there before the child had even fully opened her eyes, sitting on the edge of the mattress with the kind of patience that only comes from love and terrible necessity, her fingers smoothing Iris's tangled blonde hair, her face very still. "Good morning," Narcissa said softly. "We have something to do today, something important." Iris was 8 years old. She was not very good at counting years, not yet, but she understood the shape of difficulty in an adult's voice. She had lived in a cellar for 2 years. Cellars were dark and small, and they taught you to pay attention to the things that mattered. She did not ask questions about hard things anymore. She simply absorbed the hard things the way the cellar stones absorbed cold, and she carried them inside her where they belonged. "Will it hurt?" Iris asked. It was a fair question. Most important things hurt. Narcissa hesitated, the first time she had hesitated since Iris had known her. "Yes," she said finally, "but not in the way you might think. It will hurt in here." She placed her hand on Iris's small chest, over the child's heart. "It will hurt because you are a brave person, and brave people hurt when they have to be brave. Do you understand?" Iris nodded, though she did not entirely understand, and that was all right too. She had learned that understanding would come later, usually after the hurt had already happened. They went downstairs together, Iris in a borrowed dress that was too large, and had been hemmed at midnight with a repair charm that Narcissa had performed with steady hands despite the circumstances. Iris's feet were in small shoes that Tonks had brought because even in the middle of a war, children need to have their feet protected. The shoes were too small, actually, but Iris did not complain. She had learned not to complain about physical discomforts. She had learned that the important hurts were the ones you could not put shoes on for. Harry found himself pretending to sort wands at the table, his hands moving through the motions of task and purpose, because if he did not pretend to be occupied, he would have to watch what was happening in the corner by the window. His hands shook slightly as he moved wands from one pile to another, as if his body had not yet received the message that the night was over, that they were still alive, that no Death Eater had crashed through the walls at dawn. He kept his eyes down, though he could hear everything. Narcissa had taken off her black family ring, the heavy silver thing with the serpent coiled through its design, the ring that had been worn by black family women for 8 generations, the ring that proclaimed rank and lineage and the kind of darkness that comes from very old blood. She was pressing it into Iris's small hand, and when Iris closed her fingers around it, the ring was nearly as large as her palm. "This keeps me warm," she was telling the girl, and her voice had shifted into something else, something that was not the voice of a Death Eater's wife, not the voice of a woman who had hidden a child for 2 years. It was the voice of someone teaching something true. Not warm in the way a fire does, but warm in the way promises do. When you wear it, I am keeping my promise to you. You can feel me keeping my promise. Do you understand? "I understand," Iris said. At 8 years old, she understood very little about the world, but she understood this. "Will you come for me?" Iris asked. It was the question that mattered. It was the only question that had ever mattered. Narcissa was very still. Harry heard her make a choice in that moment, the choice to tell the truth instead of comfort the child with lies, which was harder than either one alone. A lie would have been easier. A lie would have bought a few more hours of peace. But Narcissa had not lied to this child in 2 years of hiding her, and she would not start now, not in this moment when the truth was the only gift she had left to give. "I do not know," Narcissa said. Her voice did not shake, but it changed shape, becoming smaller, more honest. "The world is at war. I cannot promise you what I cannot see. I cannot promise you tomorrow, and I would not insult you by trying. But I will try. I will try to come for you. If I cannot come for you, it will not be because I forgot you. It will only be because the world did not give me the opportunity, or because I am no longer in a position to fight for it. You must understand that distinction, Iris. It is important. The difference between being forgotten and being blocked by circumstance is the difference between grief and hope." "Yes," Iris said. She did not understand yet, not fully, but she was learning. She would understand later, when she was old enough to know the difference between the people who wanted to help you and the people who could. "One moment," Narcissa said, and she reached up to her hair where 3 ribbons were braided, silver, black, and green. The colors of the black family, of night and starlight and the spaces between. She pulled them free with small, sharp movements, and the ribbons fell like water through her fingers. She handed them to Iris, all 3 at once, and Iris held them as if they were precious things, which they were. "So you will remember that there are things in the world that are beautiful even when they are dark. So you will remember that you came from a place of darkness and it did not destroy you. So you will remember that I gave these to you, and I meant it." Harry had to look out the window then. He had to look at the winter lane, where nothing was happening, at the empty road, where no one was coming yet, at the world that continued on without knowing or caring about the small mercies being performed inside this safe house. He had to look away because if he watched one more moment of what was happening in that corner, he would break, and there was no room for his breaking here. The lane was empty except for the faintest shimmer of a concealment charm, and beyond that, the shape of the world carrying on without them, trees, grass, the ordinary cruelty of a winter morning. When Tonks arrived, she was still in her borrowed plainness, still gray-haired and gray-eyed, still wearing the expression of someone carrying weight that does not belong to her, but that she has taken on anyway because no one else could. She appeared in the kitchen without warning. The disapparition was barely louder than a thought, and she stood in the doorway and looked at Narcissa across the space where Iris sat, and for a full minute neither of them spoke. It was the first time they had been in the same room since Andromeda Tonks had been disowned for loving a muggle. It was the first time in nearly 30 years that these 2 women, cousins by blood, separated by the war the way families are separated when one side says yes and the other says no, had stood facing each other. One had stayed with her family, and one had chosen to leave. One had chosen the Dark Lord, and one had chosen the light. One had hidden a child in a cellar, and one had come to take that child away. "Nice hair," Tonks said finally. It was a strange thing to say, completely ordinary and absolutely absurd, and somehow it broke the tension that had been building since the moment she arrived. "Thank you," Narcissa replied and almost smiled. It was a small smile and it faded quickly, but it was there. It existed. In the middle of a war, in the middle of the worst night, there was a moment where Narcissa Malfoy almost smiled at her estranged cousin. "Your mother had beautiful hair, I remember, before everything." "She still does," Tonks said quietly. "It's white now, but it's still beautiful." She paused. "She asks about you sometimes. She won't admit it, but she does. She asks if I've heard anything, seen anything. She hasn't given up hoping that one day you might." "I know," Narcissa interrupted gently. "But I cannot, not yet, perhaps not ever, but I know." "She'll be safe," Tonks said then, and her voice shifted into something formal, something official. I'm going to make sure of it personally. You have my word as a member of the Order, as an Auror, as Andromeda's daughter. This child will not be harmed. This child will have a home and books and someone to teach her mathematics and piano if she wants it. This child will be given every possible thing we can give her." Narcissa studied her cousin's face with an intensity that seemed almost painful. Whatever she saw there, the steadiness, the commitment, the genuine care that was written across Tonks's features seemed to satisfy her, though it cost her something to believe it. To believe that her family had not entirely abandoned her. To believe that there was still love there, hidden under years of war and disownment and silence. "Yes," Narcissa said finally. "I know you will. I believe you, Nymphadora, and thank you." It was the first time. Narcissa had used her cousin's full name in 30 years. The morning was nearly light now, that strange half-lit time when one can still see stars if one looks carefully, but the world is already waking up, already making demands, already dragging people back into the machinery of living and dying. Narcissa kneeled down so that she was at Iris's level, so that they were looking at each other eye to eye, and she spoke very quietly, the way one might speak to someone leaving on a ship that will not return, knowing that this might be the last words that pass between them for years. "You know how to write," Narcissa said. "Anya taught you letters. You learned so well, so quickly. I am proud of you for that. I want you to keep writing. But you must write only about the weather. Nothing about where you are, nothing about who is with you, nothing about what you are doing or learning or thinking. Only about what the sky looks like. Only about the rain or the snow or whether it was cold. Only about the things that fall from the sky and the things the sky does. Can you do that?" Iris considered this with the seriousness of someone who understood that this was a test of her ability to protect herself. Will you write back?" "If I can," Narcissa said, and she meant it. She was not making a promise lightly. "Yes, if I can, if it is safe, if there is a way, I will write back. I will write back about the weather in my world. And when we both write about snow, you will know that I am thinking of you, and I will know that you are thinking of me." They embraced then, and it was the kind of embrace that carries all the other embraces that will never happen, all the embraces of future years, all the birthday embraces and the comfort embraces and the embraces that come from simple proximity. It was an embrace that included the future in the moment it was happening, that tried to pack all the love that could not be given later into the space of a single morning. It was the kind of embrace that breaks the people holding each other, but that is the cost of loving someone in a war. Harry looked away then, giving them that small privacy, even though privacy was something neither of them would have for a very long time. He did not look out the window. He looked down at his hands instead, at the hands that had stunned a woman, that had called for extraction, that had saved these two people for one last morning together. His hands looked like they belonged to someone else. When he looked up, Tonks was kneeling beside them both, her eyes very bright. She did not touch them. She simply knelt there, this woman who was Narcissa's cousin and the daughter of a disowned aunt, and she bore witness to the goodbye. She bore witness and she wept, just slightly, just enough that it showed she understood what was being lost. Narcissa released Iris and stood. Her movements were very careful, very controlled, as if she were afraid that if she moved too quickly, she might break into pieces. Go with Tonks. She is going to take you somewhere beautiful, somewhere safe. You're going to have a room of your own. You're going to have books, real books, hundreds of them, all kinds. You're going to have lessons and you're going to learn things. Music, perhaps, drawing. The world is very big and you are going to learn about it. She paused. The people who take care of you are going to be kind because I know them and they love children. They love them the way I love you. Do you understand? Yes, Iris said. She held the 3 ribbons very tightly. She held the black family ring and the 3 ribbons and the memory of a lullaby sung in French, and she was going to carry those things for the rest of her life. And you will write about the weather. Yes, I will write about the weather. Then go, Narcissa said. And she turned away because if she did not turn away immediately, she would hold on. And holding on would be the cruelest thing she could do. Holding on would trap this child in the same way the seller had trapped her. She had to let go. Tonks took Iris's hand. Her metamorph magus hair was brown again, very normal, very ordinary. Come on, little one. Let's see what's outside. Let's see what the world looks like. They walked toward the door together, and Narcissa did not watch them go. She stood with her back turned and her hand on the counter, standing very straight, standing very still, standing like someone who had just learned how to be alone again. They left without ceremony, without dramatic goodbyes, without looking back, and then they were simply gone, disapparating with a sound like a bubble popping, like the world was deflating, like something had just ended. The kitchen was empty except for Harry and Narcissa and the gray light of morning. The chair where Iris had sat was empty. The place where she had slept was empty. The safe house had become just a safe house again, a place with rooms and walls and no purpose anymore. The cellar room was still warm. It had its own small heating charm, carefully maintained, carefully hidden, maintained across 2 years of winter and spring and summer and autumn. Narcissa stood in the doorway and did not cross the threshold. She stood very still, looking at the cot with its small indent where an 8-year-old's body had slept and grown and learned that the world was dangerous. She looked at the pile of books that she and Anya had brought down, books about history and mathematics and magic and the beautiful, impossible things that children could learn. She looked at the toys that had kept a small girl alive and sane across 2 years of hiding. The wooden blocks, the painted horses, the doll that Narcissa had made by hand on long nights when she could not sleep. And her face was the color of old paper. Her face looked like something that had been written on and rewritten on until there was nothing left of the original. Harry stood behind her. He did not say anything. There was nothing to say. The room held all the words that needed to be spoken. The empty room spoke them. Tell me she will be all right, Narcissa said at last, so quietly he almost did not hear it. It was not a question. It was a demand. It was a prayer. It was the last thing she had left to ask for. She will, Harry said. He did not know it. The war was not kind to people who made that promise. The war broke promises the way it broke people, casually, inevitably, as if breaking them was simply what the war did. But he said it anyway, and Narcissa did not ask him to prove it, and that was its own kind of mercy. That was trust without evidence. That was faith in another person's word when faith was all they had. She nodded once sharply, as if she had just closed a transaction. Then she turned away from the empty room where she had spent 2 years saving a child, and she walked very slowly back up the stairs. She was very still for a long moment. Then she said, I am going back to the manor. Today. Before noon. I am going to walk out of this safe house, and I am going to disapparate, and I am going to stand in front of him, and I am going to let him question me. Harry's hands clenched into fists. Number absolutely not. There has to be another way. Yes, she said. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were steady and terrible and perfectly clear, the eyes of someone who had already accepted the worst that could happen and had decided to meet it standing. He will question me. It is inevitable. The Dark Lord does not hear that something interesting has happened and then ignore it. He hears that something interesting has happened and he pulls on the thread until he finds the truth underneath. And if I run, if I hide, if I disappear, then he does what he always does. He finds leverage. He takes people I love. He will take Draco. He will take my son, and he will use my son to make me come out of hiding anyway, except Draco will already be broken. The Dark Lord does not accept failures without payment, Harry. I have known this my entire life. I was born knowing this. Snape said, Snape will cover me once, perhaps twice if the stars align and the lie is perfect and Voldemort's attention moves elsewhere. But eventually, inevitably, he will have to let me fall or he will fall with me. I do not intend to trap him with me. If I do it today, if I am perfect today, if I give him enough truth to distract him from the larger truths, if I convince him that I have broken and become useful again, then perhaps he will believe that I am merely a woman trying to save her own skin and her son's life. Perhaps he will believe that is all I have ever been. Can you survive it? Harry asked. Can you face him and not break? Can you look him in the eye and lie about everything that matters? She considered this with the same careful attention she had given to teaching Iris to read, with the same patience and the same depth of thought. I have been preparing to face the Dark Lord since I was born, Harry. It is what I was made for by my blood, whether I like it or not. I was born into the Black family. I was taught from infancy what it means to bend and survive. I know how to lie with my face and my voice and my blood. I have been doing it for 37 years. I have been lying about everything important since I was old enough to speak. She moved to a table and picked up a small piece of parchment, weather observations, things she had written down about the world outside the cellar during her walks, during her moments of freedom. She had written about the rain and the snow and how light changed in winter. She had written these things so that Iris would remember what the world looked like, what it felt like to be outside the cellar. I have been hoarding information, she said quietly. Aura roots, safe houses that the Order uses, things the Dark Lord does not yet know I know, things I have learned in 6 years of being married to a man he trusts. I will give him some of it. Not enough to endanger anyone alive, not enough to actually help him, but enough to prove my usefulness. Enough to make him believe he has won and I have finally broken. Enough to make him believe I am turning traitor to my own cause. She set the parchment down very carefully. Severus will know it is a lie, but Severus knows me. Voldemort will know it is technically true, but Voldemort will believe it is all the truth there is. She turned to Harry then, and her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. Promise me something. Promise me one more thing. Anything, Harry said, and he meant it, though he did not know what he was promising. If I do not survive this, if he decides to make an example of me, if he chooses to punish me for the things he suspects but cannot prove, promise me that Draco will survive it. Promise me you will make sure my son is protected. Promise me that he will not pay for my choices. Promise me that he will not bleed for my rebellion. Harry wanted to refuse. It was a terrible promise to make, an impossible promise, a promise he might not be able to keep no matter how hard he tried. But he looked at her, at this woman who had hidden a child in a cellar for 2 years and taught her to read and taught her that love mattered more than blood. He looked at her and he said, I promise you that Draco will live. I promise you that I will not let the war take your son. She nodded once, sharply, as if she had just closed a transaction, as if they had just made a contract with their lives on the line. Then she stood and straightened her robes with precise movements, smoothing the gray silk, adjusting the Black family brooch at her throat. And suddenly she was Narcissa Malfoy again, wife of Lucius Malfoy, mother of Draco Malfoy, a woman married to the Dark Lord's most trusted servant. A woman with something to prove and every intention of proving it perfectly. I should go, she said. The longer I delay, the more suspicious it becomes. I should appear at the manor as if nothing has happened. As if everything is normal. As if I am simply a woman summoned by my lord for a conversation. Harry did not want to let her go. Every part of him wanted to argue and fight and find some third way that would not exist, some path between her death and Draco's suffering. But he had learned something in his 6th year about the difference between what one wanted and what was necessary. He had learned that love sometimes meant letting people walk toward danger. He had learned that saving people sometimes required sacrifice. 1 week, he said. After you've been questioned, after the initial interrogation is over, you'll come back. Yes, she said, and the certainty in her voice was like a lifeline. In 1 week, if I can, I will find a way to get to the safe house. I will make time. We will meet here. And if you can't, Harry asked, though he did not want to know the answer. She smiled then, and it was sad and real and completely honest in a way her other smiles never were. It was the smile of someone who had already said goodbye to things. Then you will know that I could not, and you will remember what we managed, even though we failed. That is all anyone can ask for in a war, Harry, to have tried, to have mattered, however small, to have saved one child and given her a chance at a life. That is everything. He walked with her to the door. She did not allow him to follow her beyond it. She simply left, stepping out into the gray morning, and was gone. Harry stood in the doorway of the safe house and watched the lane until a patroness message came through. Lupin's voice, brief and professional. She was asking where you were at 7 p.m. last night. I told her you were with me. She seemed to believe me. Be careful. The message dissolved into silver light and was gone. He arrived back at Hogwarts an hour before breakfast, dirty and exhausted, and moving in the strange dream state of someone who has not slept in 2 days. His clothes were torn and still damp from the journey. His wand hand was shaking slightly, though he was trying very hard to hide it. He looked like someone who had been to war and come back half-broken. The common room was nearly empty. Students did not emerge for an hour yet, and the castle was in that strange, quiet time when even Hogwarts seemed to be sleeping. Only Hermione was awake, sitting by the fire with her feet pulled up under her, a book open in her lap that she was not reading. She had not slept either. She was waiting, though she did not know what she was waiting for. She only knew that Harry had left in the night and had not come back, and she knew that whatever had taken him away in the night was something terrible and something important. She looked up when the portrait hole opened. She had been listening for it for hours. "Tell me everything," she said. It was not a question. It was a command. It was friendship in its most absolute form. And Harry did. He sat down on the arm of the sofa and told her all of it. He told her about the cellar and the child who had lived there. He told her about Anya and Bellatrix and the terrible choice that Bellatrix had made at the manor. He told her about the stunning curse and the extraction and the way Lupin had appeared without questions and Tonks had taken the second child away into complete secrecy. He told her about Snape's appearance and the way Snape had looked at him like something that should have been theirs. He told her about the promise he had made to Narcissa Malfoy about her son. He told her everything in 17 sentences because that was what he could manage before his voice started to shake. He did not elaborate. He did not defend himself. He did not try to justify the choices he had made. He simply told the truth, and he let Hermione see the weight of it. Hermione listened without interrupting. She did not flinch. She did not judge. She simply listened, taking in the enormity of what he had done, the impossible choice he had made in a cellar in the dark, the way he had reached across sides of a war and saved people he was not supposed to save. When he finished, he sat in silence. There was nothing else to say. Everything important had been said. Hermione got up and put her arms around him without a word. She did not ask for forgiveness or permission. She simply held him, and Harry stood there with his arms at his sides while she held him, not quite able to believe that he had survived the night. For the first time since it had begun, since he had opened the cellar door and seen Iris's face, he could feel the weight of what he had done. The weight of the choice. The weight of the consequence. The weight of the fact that a child was now alive in the world because of him, and 2 other people were going to have to live through a war because of him. "You did the right thing," Hermione said into his shoulder. Her voice was very certain. "I don't know if I did," he said. And he meant it. He did not know. He might have destroyed Narcissa Malfoy. He might have failed Draco. He might have put everyone at risk for one child who he did not even know. "You did," Hermione said, and she pulled back enough to look him in the eye. "Trust me on this, Harry. You did the right thing. Whatever comes next, whatever happens, whatever the consequences are, you did the right thing." "We tell Ron tonight," she said. "He deserves to know." He deserves to know what we've done and why we've done it. And then we figure out what comes next." Harry sat down on the rug in front of the fire because his legs would not hold him anymore. The castle was beginning to wake around him. He could hear footsteps in the corridors above, the distant sound of the castle shifting itself for a new day, shifting out of night and into the terrible light of morning. He let himself shake, finally, the trembling starting in his hands and moving through his whole body, and Hermione sat down beside him on the rug and did not say anything else. She just sat there, bearing witness to the break, and that was exactly right. That was the only thing anyone could do in the face of what had happened. Simply be there. Simply bear witness. Simply refuse to let the person breaking do it alone. The questioning happened at noon, exactly as Voldemort had promised, in his favorite room at the manor, a long chamber hung with tapestries and portraits of death, walls lined with instruments of the kind that had no purpose except pain and the expression of power. Bellatrix watched from the corner, her narrow eyes bright with the fevered possibility of vindication. She was waiting for Narcissa to break. She was waiting to see her sister reduced to the things that Bellatrix was: desperate, dependent, utterly devoted. Lucius stood by the fireplace like a piece of furniture that had learned to breathe. His expression was carefully empty. He did not look at his wife as she entered. He had learned long ago that to look too interested in anything was to invite the Dark Lord's attention, and the Dark Lord's attention was death. Narcissa walked in wearing gray silk and a black family brooch, and the expression of a woman who had already accepted her own destruction. She walked in and she closed the door behind her. 20 minutes later, she walked out exactly as composed as she had entered. Her face was very pale. Her eyes were very still. There was a slight discoloration on her throat that had not been there before, marks that looked like they had come from a hand, or from the pressure of something very hot held very close. She passed Bellatrix at the doorway without slowing. She did not acknowledge her sister. She simply walked past her the way one might walk past a statue, present, but not alive, not really. "Bella, dearest," she said quietly, her voice sweet and sisterly and terrible in the way that only Narcissa could make it. "Do try to remember things more clearly next time. The Dark Lord noticed you were confused." Bellatrix said nothing. She did not move. She stood in that doorway for a very long time after Narcissa had gone, her hand touching the spot where Narcissa had brushed past her, her fingers coming away cold. And for the first time in her long, desperate love of the Dark Lord, she wondered if she had chosen correctly. She wondered if she had ever been anything but a tool. She wondered if her sister, her clever, terrible, heartless sister, had understood something about power that Bellatrix had never learned. A week passed. Harry did not hear from Narcissa. The silence was absolute. There was no message, no patronus, no indication that she had survived the questioning and made it back to some version of safety. Harry attended classes and Quidditch practice, and he pretended very hard to care about potions, grades, and homework and the ordinary machinery of school, though inside he was dying. Every day he thought about what he might have caused to happen. Every day he imagined the ways that Voldemort might be punishing her for things he could not prove. He imagined her breaking. He imagined her betraying him. He imagined her choosing to save herself by giving Voldemort the safe house location, and he tried very hard not to hate her for the survival instinct that might do that. He did not sleep. He could not sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in that cellar, or back at the manor, or back in Voldemort's presence. And he could see the moment when the Dark Lord looked at Narcissa and decided to break her. The war carried on in its slow, grinding way. A student was found cruciated in the 7th floor corridor, and no one could explain why, and the Carrows seemed to find this very funny. The Carrows increased their detention assignments. They started holding them in a room where screaming echoed off the walls and collected in the corners. Dumbledore grew older before his time, and Harry understood, finally, that the war was not something that happened to you. The war was something that happened inside you. The war was watching people you cared about march toward their own destruction and being unable to stop them. The war was knowing that you had sent someone to face Voldemort alone because you had made a promise to a child. On the 6th day of waiting, Harry could not stay at Hogwarts another moment. He took his invisibility cloak and he snuck out after dark, and he made his way to the lane where the safe house waited. He knew the way now, the turn in the lane that only existed for him, the space that bent itself around his presence, the door that only opened because he had been invited into this strange alliance. The cellar was cold and empty except for the memory of warmth. The cot was stripped, the books were gone, the toys were gone. There was nothing left of Iris except the indent in the mattress where she had slept, and even that would fade with time. He waited in the kitchen. He did not build a fire because fire meant he was expecting to stay, and he had learned that hope could be dangerous when you built a home for it. Hope could make you stupid. Hope could make you believe that things were going to be all right when the world was very clearly telling you that they would not be. The apparition sound was so quiet he almost missed it. Just the displacement of air, the world correcting itself, a small implosion of space. Narcissa appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, and she was wearing the same gray silk she had worn when she left 6 days ago. The silk was torn in places. It was stained with things that Harry did not want to identify. She was very thin. There was a bruise on her throat that was shaped like fingers, like someone had tried to choke her and had decided at the last moment not to finish. Her eyes were the eyes of someone who had been to somewhere dark and had come back, if she had come back. If what was standing in the doorway was still Narcissa or only the shape of her. They did not embrace. They did not move. They stood looking at each other across the table, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was the only thing that mattered. "You came," Harry said. "I promised," Narcissa replied. Her voice was hoarse, as if she had been screaming and had finally stopped. She sat down slowly, carefully, like someone whose body had learned distrust of itself, like sitting down might prove that she was still real, still present, still capable of ordinary motion. She sat down and she folded her hands on the table and she did not look at Harry. "He knows I lied about some things," she said. "He does not know which things. That is the important part. He did not find the true lies hidden inside the false truths. He believed me about the apothecary Severus's cover held. It held perfectly. The other girl, the extraction, your involvement, I gave him shadows. I told him I had been assisting Bellatrix with tests, as a loyal subject might. I told him I had not been entirely sure the second child even existed, that perhaps Bellatrix had been testing my nerve, trying to trick me into some proof of disloyalty. I told him so many small true things and one large false thing, and he moved between them like a child reading a book with pages missing. He could not quite find the false thing in the maze of the true ones. "The bruise," Harry said, "is the price of my usefulness," she replied. He needed to know I had suffered something. He needed to know that his presence had broken me, at least a little. I gave him that. I allowed him to hurt me in small ways so that he would be satisfied that I had been afraid. It is a calculation. It could have been worse. She lifted her hand to her throat and touched the bruise gently, as if she were checking to see if it was real, if her body was still attached to her. "It will fade. Things fade eventually. Bruises fade. Fear fades. Memories fade." "Not everything," Harry said. "No," she agreed. She looked at him then, and her eyes were very steady and very sad. "Not everything fades. Some things stay with you forever, but you learn to live with them. You carry them the way you carry a stone in your pocket, always there, always weighing on you, but eventually you stop noticing the weight." She reached into her sleeve very carefully, as if her arm might not follow her instructions, and she withdrew a letter. The parchment was thin and worn, as if it had been read many times, as if someone small had held it in small hands over and over again, checking that it was real, that the person who had loved her had not forgotten her. She handed it to Harry carefully, as if it might break. The letter said only, "It snowed here yesterday. It was very cold. The bread is good. It snows like stars coming down. I think of you when I count the snowflakes." It was not signed. It could not be signed. Signed letters were dangerous. Signed letters could be traced. "She is alive," Narcissa said. Her voice was very small. She is safe. She writes about the weather." Harry folded the letter carefully, very carefully, aware that he was holding something precious. "You'll write back." "I cannot, not in a way that is safe, not yet, but I will receive them." Lupin has arranged it, a Patronus message that burns itself after reading, a method that cannot be traced back to me or to the safe house. I will know that she is well. I will know that she remembers. I will know that she is alive and that the world has not taken her. She stood slowly, as if moving required tremendous effort, and she walked to the cellar room, the room that had held an 8-year-old girl for 2 years and had changed everything. She had changed everything. Harry had changed everything. They had broken the rules, and they had broken the laws, and they had broken the code of the Dark Lord. And for what? For one child. For Iris. For the possibility that somewhere in the world, a little girl would grow up and know that someone had loved her enough to lose everything for her. She stood in the doorway, as she had stood the morning Iris left, and she did not cry. She had probably used up all her tears in that room with Voldemort. She had probably learned that tears were a luxury that people like them could not afford. Harry stood beside her, not touching, not needing to touch. Some griefs were too large for physical contact. Some griefs could only be borne in silence in the presence of another person who understood. "The war has not ended," Narcissa said softly. It was a statement of fact, not a question. "No," Harry agreed. "We have only moved it 1 inch. 1 tiny, insignificant inch. It will not change anything. The Dark Lord will still win. The war will still grind on. Children will still die." "Yes," Harry said. "But 1 child did not die," Narcissa said. "1 child will live. 1 child will write letters about the weather, and someone will read them and know that she is alive. 1 inch is not much, but it is something." "1 inch is something," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "1 inch is something." She pulled the curtains closed on the empty room. The shadows covered the space where Iris had slept. The darkness covered the place where a child had learned to hope despite everything in the world telling her to despair. The curtains closed, and the cellar became just a cellar again. Cold, empty, dark, forgotten. They stood in the safe house as the sun went down, as the winter night came in like a slow death, as the world outside carried on with its war and its small mercies. The snow was falling again, that delicate, useless snow that changed nothing and meant everything to the people who had been taught to notice it. Snow was what Iris wrote about. Snow was how Narcissa would know her daughter was alive. Outside, on the lane, a tall figure under an invisibility cloak that was not quite invisible enough waited in the gathering dark. Harry's cloak never fit right. It was too large, and the edge of it dragged in the snow, leaving traces that only someone looking very carefully would see. Only someone who knew him would notice. Narcissa did not turn to face him. She stood at the window of the empty cellar room, and she spoke to the closed curtain instead, to the memory of the child who had lived in that room, to the future that might never come but was still worth trying for. She spoke to the darkness that had held Iris for 2 years, and that had, somehow, become a place of love. "I will see you next month, Potter," she said. Her voice came through the darkness like a promise, like a vow, like the smallest possible act of rebellion. "I'll be there," Harry replied from the lane. His voice came through the walls like an echo, like hope, like the smallest possible resistance to a war that would grind on and on and on, breaking people and cities and the world itself. Neither of them moved for a long moment. The snow fell. The world turned. Somewhere in a place that no one knew, a place so secret that even Dumbledore would never learn where it was, a little girl was growing up. She was learning things. She was becoming herself. She was writing letters about the weather on parchment that would burn itself after being read. And a woman who had saved her was reading those letters, and knowing that she had been right to risk everything. Somewhere in the world, Iris was alive because Narcissa had hidden her. Iris was alive because Harry had chosen to save her instead of letting the war dictate who lived and who died. That was not nothing. That was everything. Then Narcissa pulled the curtain completely closed, and the lane outside was empty. The snow kept falling. The night kept coming. Harry waited until he could not feel his feet anymore, and then he did too, disappearing into the darkness the way shadows disappear when dawn comes. The war had not ended. They had made it move 1 inch. That was enough. That had to be enough, because it was all they had. Chapter 5 end.